Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz.
I'm Steven Zuber, and welcome to 2024. That's what you were going to say, right?
That is what I was going to say.
Yep.
It's the newest year of all the years that have ever come.
So far, yeah, pretty good.
Yeah. I realized when someone asked on the Discord what happened to the last episode is that in the previous episode we didn't say, hey, we'll be skipping Christmas and back next year. It is a thing we have done, I think, every year. Maybe not our first year, but pretty sure every year we've skipped the Christmas episode because it's freaking Christmas, man. We got to celebrate the birth of our Lord some way, and the way we do it is by not working.
We'll make it up to you guys.
We will?
Somehow.
Okay. I was about to say, because this episode is going to be in the theme of taking her easy, a totally self-indulgent episode where we catch up, chat about things, do some listener feedback, and just in general don't have a topic.
Just hanging out. Yeah, no, I'm super into it. I think it'll be fun.
I want to start out with a remember when kind of thing.
Ooh, fun.
Remember when, back in the new atheism days, in the early aughts, I'm sure you did this too, you would find something really neat or pithy on the internet and you would snip it and copy it to a text file or something somewhere so you'd have it?
I don't recall ever actually doing that, but I definitely had resources I'd go to for quick finds. Honestly, I think a lot of that work was done for me. You know, if I was like looking up like what was Hitch's razor or something, you know, like I could go find those pretty quickly. And there are a lot of amalgamations of like tidbits and stuff on various websites, but can't say I ever put one together myself.
I think pretty much all my friends had this thing where if we came across something really cool or really funny or just like nowadays it's something that you would drop on Twitter, but back in the day it was just like, this is cool, and you copy it and you save it somewhere so that you have it and you can refer back to it. And honestly, you never did, but there was just this archiving instinct, which I think is a remnant of back when things were much harder to find. I now that like everything is always available online and you can Google it or chat GPT it, there's less of this desire. But yeah, it was always just massively long text files after a while that were filled up with 1 or 2 line things, sometimes 1 or 2 paragraph things that were just perfect for some reason, and everyone did it.
I definitely, and I still have parts of it, like collections of downloaded YouTube videos back when that was harder to do. I have like lots of old pictures, not like photographs I took, but random art online or something. Yeah. Again, the kind of thing that, you know, maybe you could bookmark easily now or something, but I've still got them like on an external hard drive somewhere.
It's weird. My MP3 folder kind of stopped 8 years ago.
Redundancies, man.
Yeah, it's weird. Now I can just get it online, so I don't bother downloading things anymore. And that seems like a shame too. You would go to LAN parties and everybody would exchange all their MP3s and their quotes files and everything.
LAN parties. That was a little bit not before my time. It was just outside my circle.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, how else would you play Quake with all your buds and yell at them when you pineapple their asses?
Ah, that's the thing. You didn't, or I didn't.
Okay, fair enough.
But we did split screen Mario Kart and stuff, you know?
Yeah. I mean, but you couldn't really do that with Quake because then you could see the other person's screen and where they are. And
oh yeah, split screen GoldenEye and stuff. You know, that was just ripe for cheating.
I bring it up because in the Less Wrong posts that I go through and pull out the next 2 every episode. Starting a few episodes ago, the original Rationality Quotes posts went up, and I've been skipping them because they're just quotes that are encapsulating the vibes of rationality. But for a second, I contemplated, should we bring up one of these, talk about it, do something like that? And I opened it up and I looked through it, and I was like, no, that is a bygone era. There's not much to talk about here unless we just want to ride a nostalgia train, which I am famously allergic to, so I closed it again. But do you remember those Rationality Quotes posts when they went up and your feelings around them?
I'd have to skim them. I mean, I remember the 12 Virtues of Rationality.
Oh, these were definitely not that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I'll go look and see if they jog memory, but nothing jumps to mind, no. Why, did you save some of these back in the day?
Oh, yeah, I'm absolutely, I did. I guess whenever I found one in the quotes that was one that I had also saved, it felt like, oh, yes!
I love it. Yeah, I mean, there's like...
feels like seeing your in-group.
Yeah. This would have been, 2007 or 8. This was back when, I guess finding your bookmarks was pretty easy, but I like the idea that you independently saved them.
I went ahead and just tossed you one.
Oh, these do ring a bell. Perfection is our goal. Excellence will be tolerated. I like it. This is a nice way of putting it. Morality is objective within a given frame of reference. Sure.
Yeah.
kind of like speed.
I like this one. If there was a verb meaning to believe falsely, it would not have any significant first person present indicative.
That sounds like a Wittgenstein, which it is, to be clear.
How
I'm not being
how do you
pretentious.
know what Wittgenstein sounds like?
Convoluted. I listen to a lot of philosophy podcasts, and I used to read stuff back in the day.
Neat. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was a philosophy nerd.
What is some of your favorite one of your favorite philosophy podcasts?
Back in the day, this might actually still be a thing, was Philosophy Bites. It'd be like 15-minute, 20-minute interviews with people about like a very specific subject. In fact, there was one with Daniel Dennett and The Chinese Room that I really liked because he hates that thought experiment. That was John Searle's, I think, Chinese Room experiment or thought
Mhm.
experiment.
And it is horseshit, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, so Searle is like, well, the guy in there doesn't know Chinese, right? And neither does the computer. And Dennis like, well, no, the room does. Like for whatever,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter. This is kind of like it boils down to, and I don't think he puts it this way, but that like simulated knowledge is knowledge.
Hmm.
You know, if I'm getting the right Chinese out of it, I don't care if it knows Chinese, quote unquote, right?
Hmm.
And this actually just is super apropos because I'm sure this podcast is recorded years before anyone was using large language models for anything. And does ChatGPT know various languages? Does it matter? That seems like a wrong question.
Hmm.
I don't know. When I was like 14 or 15 for Christmas, I wanted a collection of CDs that was like introduction to philosophy courses. That was by Colin McGinn,
Oh, cool.
and that was pretty good. It was funny at the meetup a few days ago. We were talking consciousness stuff, which was riveting, and I had to dust off a lot of old thoughts because I haven't really thought about that stuff in a while. And the last section of Colin McGinn's course was on consciousness, and he advocates a position called defeatism. Excuse me, Mysterianism. I call it defeatism because he says that this could just be something that's actually outside of our ability to understand.
Mm.
And it's like, yeah, people said that about lots of stuff, dude.
Yeah.
So I'm not ready just to whatever give up, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry. The idea of consciousness is outside of our ability to understand?
The question that was posed, that you seem to not the hard problem of consciousness, the solution to it being outside of human comprehension.
Which is like the hard problem of fairies or the hard problem of gravity. There is no hard problem.
I think the hard problem of fairies is solved because they're fake. The hard problem of gravity is like, why do objects of mass attract each other? Like that's just a
Hmm.
law of nature.
Yeah.
But the question of like, so why do I perceive whatever my computer screen when I look at it? That's just physics. But
Hmm.
why is it like something to perceive my computer screen as opposed to looking at my water bottle? Like there's a distinct difference in experience there, even though the physics underlying it is basically the same. There's a qualitative difference.
There's a difference in what's going inside of your brain, too.
Yeah, the inputs and stuff are different, but the
And
experience
the
of it.
output. Like literally everything that you're describing maps to something that is happening in the brain with some sort of physical object.
Yeah. Carrie had a great analogy too, with like the 17th century scientists rubbing a glass tube with sheepskin or sheep's wool and a copper tube with lead and then touching them and then they spark. So to say, hey, why is that happening? And if the scientist said, well, it's a fundamental law of nature that when you rub a glass tube with wool, it just, is ready to be sparked. That's just wrong, right? Any answer like that was missing the underlying picture of electrons and electromagnetism, right? Like,
Yes.
so I think
I mean,
I think that by just saying, well, your experience of the red cup is just a law, is just physics, or just I think it's missing the important part of it, right?
I don't think so. But what I responded to Carrie with was that sure, but if you say that you rub these two together and you get a spark, and therefore there is some unknown mysterious thing in addition to the universe, in addition to the material universe, which we need to try to understand, then you're more wrong than I am when I say that's just what happens when you rub glass with wool, right? I am the less wrong of the two there. But also,
But there's a third option there, which is to say something's happening here, but I don't know what it is.
yeah, but like if you look deeper and you get to the electrons and electromagnetic theory and how when you touch a positive and negative charge thing together, sometimes they'll bridge the gap and that results in a spark. All that basically boils down to the positive and negative charged things attract each other, and then the question that is like why, and eventually you get down to the that's just how the universe works. Like, why do two things with mass draw each other? That's what it means to have mass, you know? There's not an ultimate why unless you're going all the way to Tegmark and saying, like, well, everything that can be described mathematically is instantiated physically. And at that point, you can also ask again, why? Like, there is no why. This is just what reality is.
Right. At the bottom of the, I don't know, the deep well of whys, there's bedrock, right?
Mm.
This isn't so much a why question as it is a how question or a what question, right?
I don't think the how is unanswered. The how is we see what happens in your neurons. That's what neurons do. They create this feeling. When you
I'll have to. I mean, I don't know if we want to make this whole thing a digression into the hard
nah
problem of consciousness, but I guess
into the non-problem of consciousness.
I mean I think you're missing what's tripping people up, but I'm having a hard time articulating it better than I already have. So, like, I'm actually pretty sure you're seeing it and just saying that's not a problem, but
Well, I'm definitely missing why it's a problem to think that minds is what brains create.
it's not that's not the hard problem. I think the hard problem is like why not why where if I drop a rock off a building from a certain height, it's going to hit the ground at a certain speed depending on how high it was, right? Calculating
Mhm.
for wind resistance.
Mhm.
But it so like there's simple physics there. There's less simple physics about why the Earth orbits the sun, even though they're related. And then you've got like the strong force of electromagnetism holding atoms together, or the strong nuclear force, and then weak nuclear forces. It's not really clear where in that mixture comes up with like the what it's like to feel warm, versus feeling cold. And it's coming from somewhere in the meat in our heads. You take enough of that meat out and that stuff stops happening. But it's not like coming from one neuron. It's not coming from probably any three neurons, right? There's some critical mass you have to hit. It could probably be done with other stuff.
Yeah.
So like I'm not positing that there's some like magic thing above science. I'm just saying that there's something about qualia that is of a different nature than like whatever something's mass or shape, you know?
I mean, I know what you're saying. I think it's best summed up in an SMBC comic that I saw not too long ago, which I really wish that I had saved, maybe in one of these in one of these quotes files.
Because he makes it
Where
impossible to search his website.
God, I
It's
mean,
such a drag.
yes,
Yeah.
it really is. But a human's talking to an advanced AI, and it's asking it along the lines of like, what is consciousness, right? And the AI doesn't understand at first, and after some talking, it's like, oh, is this one of these problems where you humans don't understand numbers? And the human's like, what do you mean we don't understand numbers? He's like, well, when you have one of something, you can understand it, and that's really that's fine with you. You get it. You can boil it down to everything. But once you have a lot more than one of something, all of a sudden you get confused and everything seems like magic to you. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, like a water. One molecule of water you can understand, you know all the physics, everything. But then you get many, many millions of molecules of water, and all of a sudden they do things like have fluid dynamics and pressure and current and mentions all these other things that, make the fluid dynamics a hard and interesting science. And like you're like, oh no, we don't get it, it's an emergent property, how could many waters do this? Ha 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 ha. And that's the human. The human's like, what does that have to do with anything? It's like, yeah, you can totally get like how one synapse works or how one transistor works, but all of a sudden you put a whole bunch of transistors together and emergence of intelligence happens and it can talk to me. Oh my god, how is that happening? And the joke, the comic does it much better than I was just doing. But basically, the idea that humans, when there's a whole lot of something, humans are not able to track all of it, and so it breaks down in their minds and feels magical to them, which actually is strangely related to the strong post we're going to talk about later. But
Nice.
it's ultimately just a whole lot of small things interacting, and that there's nothing magical about that except for the fact that we can't track all of it, and so therefore we feel ignorant of it, and therefore it feels magical.
I mean, yeah, I think the difference there is like there's a difference between understanding the brain processes involved for making consciousness happen. Like,
Mhm.
again, it's it's possible that well, it's likely that in the future, in the not too distant future, we'll have some understanding of like, oh, here's how we can put a thought in someone's head. They already have like cool neural implants for people like with I heard about one with a woman with extreme depression whose life just wasn't worth living. They did some neural implants, and they are able to monitor when like the depression, I don't know, is happening at its hardest, and just send counter signals, and
Nice.
it essentially cured her depression.
Oh, that's awesome.
Or at least made it more bearable. We can do that, but I guess maybe the hard problem is a why question. It's like why is my perception of whatever my water bottle here? Why does it feel like anything at all instead of just happening without any internal experience? And to say, well, internal experience just happens when you have neurons in that put together. That's a lot like saying, well, sparks just happen when you rub sheepskin and copper together. Like, yes, it's true, but it doesn't explain why.
Okay. I assume that if I had a lot more time and also knowledge, I could explain all the little bits that go together into how thoughts propagate and how attention and focus changes and how it can be turned in upon itself. And that creates the feeling of consciousness. But I don't have that time or that expertise. Or to be honest, even that knowledge, I would be bullshitting through at least half that. So I wouldn't want to do that. I'd want to get an expert to actually do that so that they could not lie to you when they're unclear about something.
The experts all seem unsure. If there isn't, as far as I am going to understand yet, somebody who's like, "Oh, I've solved the hard problem."
I do see some people who say basically there is no hard problem. Once you know how neurons work, especially how neurons work as a group, there just isn't the problem, and other people don't accept it.
It could be.
Including some neurobiologists who are like, yeah, no, I don't accept that this is the end. There must be something more, and so but I think there's at least some people who are like, yeah, we figured it out.
Hmm.
There just isn't a problem.
Maybe they're right. Maybe the majority of us are just missing, are looking for a deeper why than there is. In any case, you pulled up this thing of rationality quotes here, and we joyously segued into philosophy stuff.
It did. That's why this is the self-indulgent episode. We can just digress however we wish to. I have a question for you. What did you think about the polyamory episode? Did you have thoughts about it? Because you were not there for that one, but I remember you said you listened to it.
Oh yeah, it was fun. I am trying to think of. I think I am 98% in agreement with Yassine. Like, I think he said everything I would have said, just better.
Yeah.
Certainly, I definitely share his frustration with Ayla's. I can use words however I want, kind of redefining of polyamory.
I don't think that's what she's doing.
I liked his follow-up post where I think he explains it really well. And I think we'll have him on to talk about that at some point, because it was definitely enjoyable enough to talk about at length. But the post, if anyone wants a sneak peek, is mono poly restricted trust on ymascut.substack.com. What was Ayla's thing? Like, oh, it's just we don't have constraints on each other's behavior or whatever.
Yeah, the primary thing about poly relationships is that you don't put any restrictions on what your partner does with other people.
I mean, so his example, and I kind of wanted to ask you about this, was like, is it not like an implicit thing that, when you're with a primary partner, that like she not fuck your dad? Like, there seems to be some kinds of unspoken sorts of things there, right? And maybe you're just going to bite that bullet and be like, no, I'll totally have dad sloppy seconds, but maybe you wouldn't.
It's interesting that you phrase it, I totally have dad sloppy seconds, because that feels
I'm deliberately making it as gross as possible.
Yeah, because just before you said that, I was about to say, I might just be happy for my dad. Like that'd be nice for him to finally, get a little bit of variety. I don't know why I would be that upset about it, but maybe I am significantly outside of the norm, and even most polyamorous people would not want someone sleeping with their father.
What about his example of like the harem? It's like, all right, I've got 50 women in my harem. They can't sleep with anybody except for me, but I can sleep with whoever I want. Therefore,
that is very obviously not polyamory.
But it fits Ayla's definition.
It does not. It would kind of fit the definition in that the women are poly and he's not. But
right, even though they're only allowed to have sex with one person, but he can have sex with as many as he wants. So like it seems super counterintuitive.
it is outside of the distribution to such a large degree that I don't think this counts as an example at all. Like, if you have one person controlling and the other person not controlling, at that point, it's not even really a polyamorous relationship, in my opinion. Like, being forced into, not necessarily forced into, but and the mutuality of it is pretty darn important, in my opinion. And I think monogamous people generally agree that they want their partners to be monogamous as well. So I don't think this mutuality is a weird thing that I'm imposing on the definition. I think this is just generally expected.
The mutuality isn't actually part of Ayla's definition.
No, it's not. But,
S-
maybe it should be.
That's part of the weirdness of it, is that, like, to her, it, quote, it doesn't matter if they're acting on it or not. It doesn't matter if you don't feel like banging anybody else, as long as your partner could go have sex with / love someone else if they wanted. Then to me, that's polyamory. And so again, the guy who gets to fuck all the women he wants is not polyamorous, but all the women who are doting on him are, even though they only get to have sex with one person. It also has like this weird in potentia thing of like whether or not someone's actually doing something versus like just their dispositions, right?
I mean, can you be gay if you've never slept with a dude?
Uh, I mean that's a good. I was gonna say rejoinder, but we're not arguing. That's a good intuition pump, and
Right.
it seems so. But like it would also seem weird to say that someone's gay because they could have sex with somebody of the same sex, they just haven't yet, but they're free to. It's not about wanting to; it's about the freedom.
I mean, I do think it's about the wanting to, but
Not
the main thing
not to
about
Ayla. It doesn't matter if you want to. It doesn't matter if you're acting on it or not.
I think
It's the idea that they could.
yeah.
Does the fact that you could have sex with a guy make you gay?
All right, so what is the most important defining aspect of monogamy?
I guess I should know this as someone who's in a straight monogamous relationship. I'm not the best person to ask. I will say on the spot something along the line. Yeah, I guess if you're going to do strict monogamy, it's like, hey, look, we save the sex stuff for each other.
Right.
Yeah,
That I mean that's basically the definition of monogamy is you only do sex stuff with this one other person you've decided to do it with, and they likewise only do it with you. And polyamory is basically under her definition just not that, which is I think a perfectly serviceable definition and generally what people mean by it. You're like, yeah, we're basically not monogamous.
well, I mean, what's the commonly accepted? I think the common, like the practical usage of it is like the practice or desire for multiple concurrent romantic or sexual relationships,
Mm-hmm.
which is distinct from just not forbidding your partner from having those relationships, right?
I mean, sometimes you don't desire more relationships, even when you only have 0 or 1, and that doesn't make you not poly. Just like sometimes you don't want to be in any relationship, but that doesn't make you not gay.
I feel like it's complicating things in a way that's confusing, and her.
I think the reason I like it so much is because the way it is phrased is very much dependent on the circumstances that you find yourself in of relationships or wanting more relationships or something. Like there's an object out there in the universe being a partner that defines whether you're poly or not, and her definition is much more just like, no, this is who you are, this is your personality, and whether or not you have these partner objects in your life doesn't particularly matter.
I suppose I still think that the harem example is it fits enough into the definition, and yet seems to violate it that I don't think it's a good definition.
This is weird that some monogamous people think that that example is at all a counterexample because it is just so weirdly out of the norm that I don't. It seems absolutely obviously not.
I would say it's obviously not poly too, but it's
Yeah,
hard to see how it isn't according to Ayla's definition.
because he's putting restrictions on the ladies.
But they're not on him, so they're all polyamorous.
Nah, no,
But
no.
by this step, by the word of the definition,
Okay,
as long as we're arguing by definition,
all definitions fail at the extreme edges because that's no definition is completely robust. I think there's even a famous book about this, or a theorem, or something along the lines. Isn't Gödel Escher Bach about this? Nothing can be completely self-consistent and comprehensive.
I'm a
So
poser, and I
yeah,
just bought that book 15 years ago and haven't read it yet. So
I mean, I've never read it either, but I hear that's what it's about. So yeah, there's places where the definition breaks down, and you can find those places, but like that is true of every definition ever, and I just don't think it is very pertinent. It's very easy to say, yeah, that's not no.
I mean, so like here's the thing: is like I feel like my partner could go have sex with / love someone else if they wanted to,
Hmm.
But I don't think that makes me polyamorous because we're in practice not doing that.
Okay.
So like,
And you would like still be okay with it in a relationship with her and all that?
yeah, I mean, it the thing is like we currently have a norm, the two of us, of whatever not doing that. So
Hmm.
if that were to change suddenly and without notice, that would be, I don't know,
Distressing.
well, at least an unwelcome surprise,
Yeah.
like, so it would have to be like a conversation.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, then I can't see where the problem would be with it. But it's not the fact that we're like not practicing that seems to be like a very important difference
Yeah. I mean,
between.
it feels like you're functionally monogamous, but not like obligate monogamous.
I mean, I suppose. But I mean, isn't that kind of I? It's like saying that, like, I'm functionally straight, but I could go have sex with other guys. So like, you might as well call me, whatever, bi. Like,
No, I would say if you're functionally straight, then basically you're straight.
the definition here seems to imply that, like, no, Stephen, that's textbook poly. If you read this new textbook I put out, but it doesn't seem to jive with common use or intuition. And then it just begs the question of like, why redefine it in a way that's confusing?
That is something I would like to talk to Ayla about because I have a theory, but I don't want to like put things out there without getting her input on it.
Yeah, of course. No, that makes sense. But
Yeah.
you just asked my thoughts on it, so that was the thing. Is I shared his frustration there.
Okay.
I think that he said he would divorce his wife if she came home and said she had sex with somebody else.
Yeah.
And I definitely wouldn't. So that's one area of like whatever non-overlap that we have. But I think it's
Hmm.
just different expectations that we have.
Hmm.
Anyway, I'll leave it there.
It was really surprising to me on the Discord how many, like, basically all the poly people were like, yeah, okay, seems a little, maybe little weird definition, but basically fine. And a lot of monogamous people were really upset about the idea that the definition implied that monogamous people put restrictions on their partners. That was just very viscerally bad feeling for them. And I mean, I kind of understand that, but like on the other hand, that is literally the point of monogamy. And
I see where the disconnect's coming from then. This
okay.
this new definition is nice in that it's nice for poly people in that it's a good solid dig at mono people because they're those evil pricks who are controlling the lives of their so-called loved ones.
Uh-huh.
And uh, for the rest of us, it's like, no, we just don't do that. Like, is my wife allowed to burn the house down? Like,
Right.
I mean, it's not it's we've never talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of thing though that would make me seriously question our bond if she burnt the house down, especially with me in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not so much a restriction on her behavior as it is like an expectation that we've set for each other, even implicitly. She's also free to whatever try to kill me, but she won't, or she
Yeah.
shouldn't, right? That would also be a
Mm-hmm.
violation of our relationship. Is it a constraint? Am I putting restrictions on her by saying please don't stab me in my sleep?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean that only kind of rhetorically.
Actually, I do agree with you, and I think this is why she is using this definition, and I think it is a good thing because it, in at least in my opinion, it kind of points out that trying to phrase this in a politically not stupid way.
No, don't pull your punches. Go nuts.
Like what is socially acceptable is decided by society, right? We all agree that burning down the house you guys live in not socially acceptable, maybe a good reason for divorce. The thing that has been, I don't want to say shouted from the rooftops, just a such a strong concrete underlying norm and pushed by normie society for, I don't know, centuries at least, has been that, oh, if there's any sort of sleeping with other people in a relationship, that is as bad as burning a house down, and the person who did it is automatically at fault and the other person is completely free of any relationship blame, and society will support the other person. This extends to things like, well, is it okay to kiss other people? No, obviously not. That might lead to sleeping. Is it okay to flirt with other people? No, definitely not. Can you talk with other people? Well, okay, it's all right in the workplace, and maybe you're allowed to have some opposite sex friends, but don't get too close, etc. And I get the feeling that part of her reason for choosing this specific definition is, in fact, to push back and say, actually, you guys are complete asshats. this should not be a default societal expectation that people do not sleep with other people. That is restrictive, and actually that is a bad thing. And you can, if you want to, have this thing where we agree not to sleep with other people, but that should be a new additional consideration. And having it be the default in society is horseshit. And if you hear that one person slept with another person outside of a relationship, it shouldn't be like, oh my God, that is awful. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Having that societal norm is absolute awful. And instead, it should be like, okay, interesting. How did you feel about that kind of thing? And maybe consider each individual case separately.
I mean, I'm on board with all of that, but that seems maybe I'm just an outlier monogamy practitioner, or I don't know, grew up watching different TV or something. But because like that's definitely the case, whatever 90s sitcoms, you know. But that was coming up on
Wait,
40
what's
years
the case
ago.
of 90 sitcoms?
My gal stepped out on me. She's
Yeah.
her. So like,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, I don't know. It's hard to see how a rebranding of like, well, actually, they're the controlling asshats. I think it's a lot like calling atheists brights,
Okay.
and implying then that the religious are the dims. Like it's
I see.
I mean I think that's why brights never took off. I think that was another
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Dennett. Nice try, bro, but it never worked for me.
Was that Daniel Dennett that tried to do that?
I know he's at least pushing. I don't know if he originated it,
Okay.
but it's like if you can recast something that makes the other people the obvious bad ones, it's a yay us kind of move. If you define Republican as anybody who is pro small government or whatever, this is actually a bad analogy. I was going to say then that tacks on all this other stuff, but like I don't know. It just seems like it's not so sneakily putting in a bunch of baggage that people don't want to adopt. It's like, of course, like the people who are in the group that it's shitting on are saying we don't like this definition, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's kind of like it's saying like I'm not anti-choice if I'm against abortion, because I think choices in all other things are good. This is just one particular area where that choice shouldn't be offered. And but the pro-choice people are like, yeah, but you're literally saying she shouldn't have the choice to have an abortion, so you are an anti-choice person, kind of thing,
And
right?
you also hate women and all that stuff. Or
Right.
like,
Yeah.
to me, a good definition of atheist is like somebody who isn't convinced that God exists, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
that gods, etc., exist. But
Mm-hmm.
if someone were to say, "Oh no, atheists are people who close their eyes and refuse to see the light and shut God out of their hearts," just running with that and saying that's the real definition makes it's needlessly antagonistic. I mean, it's right from their perspective, but
Mm-hmm.
so I think this is again not so much like that, but it's reminiscent of that. I think it's just a bad practice, I guess, to define something in this new way that happens to be awesomely self-serving.
I think I basically agree that the main thing that is driving the people apart on these sides, the Essenes and the Aylas, is the antagonistic part of the definition. And I'm still not sure if I think it's needlessly antagonistic.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's definitely thought provoking. It's just, I don't know. It also just seems to have this weird thing where, again, it's like in potential, if they could, then that's polyamory. It seems to add on a lot of stuff, but I feel like I'm talking in circles at this point. I'm not saying anything. Part of the reason I'm talking in circles is that I'm trying not just to regurgitate Yassine's well put words, and so I want to leave that to him to put it as eloquently as he did, rather than me just reading his post and pretending like I had that thought. So,
Right, yeah. I mean, one of the main reasons I agree with Ayla and like her definition is that in addition to being technically accurate, it is, as you said, antagonistic, and I kind of like being antagonistic and pushing people a little bit. I've always been a bit that way, and especially when it comes to things like I have seen how shitty it is to try to be a polyamorous person in the wider society, and it's better in some places, especially if like you're in a blue city. There's a lot of refuges, areas of refuge you can
yeah,
go to where you're mostly okay, but it still kind of sucks, and that sparks the sort of I want to fight you instinct with me. And so when someone comes out with this definition that is like, hey, come at me, bro. I'm like, yeah, come at us. Like the I and then I realized, okay, I'm being antagonistic to people like Yassine and Steven. These are good people. They're basically on my side. I like them. I shouldn't antagonize them. But on the other hand, I'm like, oh, you restricting mother effers. You, if you had to live with this shit, you'd be upset too, kind of thing, you know. And I gotta realize that's not the best instinct.
Yeah, if it's an emotional reaction to that, then that's perfectly understandable. But it does seem politically unsavvy to turn people who are like totally on your side to saying, actually, you guys are the shit people, and it's like, well, like, you're losing allies really fast, and if you want societal change, then you need to, I don't know, resist the impulse to just get in nice punches to your in group, so punch them hard enough that they become your out group.
Right. It's very common failure mode nowadays.
I think it kind of maybe always has been, but it seems like you see it all over now.
Yeah.
But yeah, not to say I don't understand. Well, I don't perfectly understand the frustration, but I can understand that there is a frustration there. That is coming out in this that I can sympathize with. It's just not one of those things that really seems worth again the effort to try and rebrand in a way. But again, like the atheists, had their share of gripes, lots of fun making in directions of non-believers, etc. Historical atrocities, yada yada. But if you've got a lot of nice and amicable allies who are either like vaguely or barely religious or even non-religious, they just don't like whatever, they're not as steadfast as atheists or something. To say, well, all religious people are just dipshit morons who think there's a bearded guy in the clouds watching them jerk off. Like it's again technically true, but super unhelpful, right? You're certainly not going to win any wars of ideas by being antagonistic that way, unless I'm not aware of any wars that have been won by being that antagonistic. I'm aware of lots of wars being started and fought that way, but I'm not sure if anyone ever actually wins that way.
Well, I mean, if we're talking actual wars, usually there's a lot of antagonism and somebody wins.
Well, I mean, a war of ideas,
Okay.
A lot of conflicts of ideas start that way, but to win a war of ideas, you need the majority to win. And if you're telling the supermajority that they all suck, you're never going to, right?
I think that's mostly true. Yeah.
That's always where this brushes up against culture war stuff, but it's like any group that's like all X suck, and sub for X, where X makes up something like 50% of the people, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but we want equality, we want this, we want that, but also all of you guys suck, and it's like, well, you're gonna have a hard time coming out on top or even coming out on level when you're telling the people, the majority of people that they suck.
See, I was talking. I agree with you. Basically, I was talking about this with Jen not too long ago, because she is like just one of the kindest, most generous people I know. Just legit, really kind. Always trying to understand people and meet them on their ground and stuff. And I was being a little bit more pushy backy and fighty on a certain topic, and she was like, "Oh God, that makes me so uncomfortable." And I agree with you. I do think the kindness and the meeting people where they are and inviting them in is the best way to solve these things. This is why I really liked our episode of street epistemology back in the day, where it was just about like being friendly and inviting people to explain things and asking them questions, but not in a snarky, shitty way. Like all that stuff. I'm totally on board with that. But also, sometimes I feel like it goes too far, where you give too much of the benefit of doubt to somebody, and then like just shitty bad actors get in and start taking advantage of that. And I feel like there really is something to be said for having like the harder, spikier people around that are just like, you know what? No, fuck you. That's stupid. You're stupid. I'm not meeting you on this particular thing. And I realize you can't have everyone like that, because then you just have eternal war forever. But also, if you have complete softness and pillowiness, then that is almost as bad, maybe just as bad.
No, I totally hear you. I mean, I tend towards the like, let's assume this person has a valid point, it's coming from a place of honesty, and that has bitten me in the ass before, where I thought people were engaging in good faith, but they weren't. I don't know. I mean, I guess the difference though is that like most people seem like they are engaging in good faith, and if I were to treat everybody or the majority of people like they weren't, then
Hmm.
I would A, be unhappier, but B, I think I'd also be wrong.
Yeah, but what if it was the opposite, where you were treating everyone or almost everyone as if they are needing to be accepted and nice and stuff? Like, I almost feel like things are better when you have a group of people that are diverse in that way, or almost. I hate to bring this to like sex role stuff, but it almost seemed like a neat hack that you would have to procreate, smash together a male and a female, and that one of them was intrinsically kinder and nicer and more understanding, and the other was intrinsically more like oppositional, because then in any particular unit you would have each side represented. And I know that's very, stereotype leaning, but also did seem to happen frequently. So maybe not a coincidence that things shook out that way. I don't know.
I'm not sure how that ties into the broader point though, but that's thought provoking.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I have whatever barriers of like, okay, you know what, I'm not going to engage this. Like I haven't burnt time talking to somebody about the moon landing in 20 years. I'm not mean or antagonistic towards them. I'm just like, no, I'm not going to bother going there. Like on our Discord, we tolerate all sorts of dissent, but like you have to get pretty far out there.
mhm.
So my thing is like if our intolerance of dissent amounted to keeping more than 50% of people out, it seems like you're just setting yourself up for failure, or you just want to stay small and marginalized,
Mhm.
which I think in some groups probably is the implicit goal. But I don't think that should be, and that's not any of my goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of like staying small and marginalized. I think that has been one of the advantages of the rationalists, is that we're weird enough and lacking in social graces enough. I mean, we've got some extremely socially graceful people, but there's such a minority that it keeps out a lot of people, because they're like, okay, no, that group is too weird. I don't need to be associated with those kinds of folks. And I think that's good, actually, because it has resulted in us not being captured by those sorts of people. And I think maybe being small and weird is actually a good thing. And any movement that gets big enough is a movement that I am going to eventually have to not be a part of anymore, like kicked out, even maybe, because I think maybe being unpopular is a gift.
I again, I think I can understand the appeal of that, but I mean that seems to just it's like then the goal of the rationalist movement, such as it is to not have too big of an impact and not or not impact too many minds lest it become popular, and that seems insane. Like,
I
wouldn't it be cool if like this was a savvy or catchy and exciting enough thing that every elected official who hadn't read the sequences was like that was the margin.
I don't think so. I think there's enough people who are different enough from us neurologically that they would not be served by having only politicians that have at least read the sequences in office. I've come much more along to the lines of our goal should be to make our communities as good and as wonderful as possible for people like ourselves, and not necessarily try to make this for everyone.
Hmm. I don't know. I guess for me, I think it's a winning life strategy, and then therefore I want everyone to have it. And if more people
Yeah,
did, maybe we wouldn't have so many companies rushing to build super intelligence before we knew what the hell we were doing about it, right?
right.
Like, so it at the cost of us staying small and unpopular, all we got was the end of the world, right? But at least we were small and
Sure,
unpopular
yeah.
the whole time. So
Oh shit.
um,
On the
I
other hand, we've been extremely influential in proportion to our numbers.
Yeah, I just think that the end goal of raising the sanity waterline is getting more sane people. And I use reading sequences as a shorthand just for whatever being into
Yeah,
this sort of
yeah.
stuff at all.
Yep. Like, look, there's this entire group of hippies out there who've never had the slightest idea what rationalism is, calling themselves post-rationalists, just because we've had enough of an impact on the cultural meme space that that's a thing you want to be now, to be cool, to be post that.
Right, because then you're less mainstream again.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a weird kind of pointless trap to fall into, but
Mhm.
I do understand that like I'm not a Democrat, but I vote blue on essentially every ticket, right?
Mhm.
Like, but I don't like the big handle because since it's so big, it's got so much baggage. That seems like the other side of where this could lead is, well, we don't want it to get so big and messy that it gets polluted with all this nonsense. or that you have to sign on with everything to be part of it or something. But I mean, I want everybody to have the basic tools, you know.
Yeah.
And I fail to see how the world would be worse if that was the case.
Yes. Having all the basic tools at least be available for people to learn them if they want them.
Yeah.
Speaking of influence on the cultural space, I want to digress onto Nick Bostrom. Do you have any opinions on Nick? Well, okay. First of all, I think I'm going to say I love Nick Bostrom, but do you have any opinions on Nick Bostrom? And then more specifically, do you have any opinions on how the media treats Nick Bostrom?
I don't really know how the media treats Nick Bostrom. Not being, my only source of news mainly being my wife and the Mind Killer. Um,
Mm.
so I have no idea if he's beloved or if they make fun of him. I like the guy. I think he's written and continues to write important stuff. I have a couple disagreements with like the specifics of his simulation argument that he's popular for,
Hmm.
but no, overall, I like him. Why do you ask?
Because this came up very recently and very much annoyed me. And since this is a self-indulgent episode, I'm going to self-indulge on this
Do it.
particular thing. Nick Bostrom, great dude, has been like way back in the original Less Wrong big poster, like deep OG rat. He's awesome, and he is the one who eventually, I mean, there's been multiple like this, but probably one of the most famous people who eventually went into academia and got actual credentials that are respected by the greater world. He's a professor at Oxford now. He has written Superintelligence and often gets media accolades for being the guy who is bringing the rationalist ideas more outside of rationalism and into wider academia, wider intellectual spaces than just the people who are on the internet, right?
Yeah, and I think that stuff's really important, and
Yeah,
that goes back to me thinking that the tools and knowledge should be wider spread.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yes, I love Nick. I've never met him personally, but from what of his writings I've read, they're great. He does really good work. Everything, nothing but mad props for him. But like recently on the Discord, we were talking about info hazards, and somebody asked about like, can we dig down a little bit on just what we're talking about here when we're talking about info hazards? And there was a quote posted from some reference. I'm not sure what reference it was, something Wikipedia related or a reference source that cited the info hazard concept as introduced by Nick Bostrom in 2011. And this really irritated me because Rocco's Basilisk happened in 2010. So at the very, very latest, info hazards were a thing that were a big concept of much discussion on the Less Wrong forums in 2010. So at least a year before when it cites as the origination of the term. And also, it wasn't Nick Bostrom that came up with it. It was, I mean, more likely than not, it was Eliezer Yudkowsky, honestly. He is the father of many of these things. If not him specifically, then like the wider Less Wrong community and discourse, which he is the shepherd and originator of. So if anyone were to actually attribute this to one single person, it would rightly be Eliezer Yudkowsky. If they didn't want to go that far, then they could say originated from like that strong rationalist community in the late 2010s. But the fact that the media always goes to Nick Bostrom really irritates me, not because of anything Nick Bostrom does, but specifically because these fuckers, like at the New York Times, they feel to me very much like in the ancient nobility, if a commoner were to come up with some amazing insight and present it to court or somewhere, then a noble would have to take credit for it, and all the other nobility would then be like, "Why, yes, did you know that Sir Lord so and so discovered this fascinating thing about the universe?" And the commoner would never be mentioned because obviously all the nobles know that all good ideas come from other nobles. And like in the early 19th, maybe early 20th century, any scientific discovery, almost any scientific discovery that was made by a woman would be attributed to a male coworker instead.
I was going to say that, but I didn't want to be. I thought that'd be provocative.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, they got almost no citations because obviously, the idea must have come from a man, right? Like
right.
women just don't have those sorts of ideas. And it is very much the same sort of thing where obviously, if a good idea came about, it is from someone who was trained and credentialed by us, the good people. Like the idea that somebody who is outside of academia and has not gotten the credentialing and the training could have a good idea is just we don't even consider that. How silly. And that really makes me want to stab like the people at the New York Times or wherever else it is that does this kind of thing, because just the complete dismissal of anyone who is not part of their rarefied elite caste as having something to contribute makes me want to not be kind and generous to them.
That's funny. I mean, funny in the not haha funny.
Yeah.
No, I feel you, and it's interesting because like there's like downstream effects of this too, right? And I don't think it's just the New York Times, like and also because a lot of these ideas kind of came from whatever niche corners of the internet that like I think are understandable that a lot of people just don't know who originated it.
Mm.
There was a funny moment when Yudkowsky was on Sam Harris's podcast years ago, and Harris wanted to ask him about Bostrom's thought experiment about the paperclip maximizer.
Yes, I remember this.
And he's like, I think as far as I know, it was me who invented that. But it's like, Bostrom probably wrote about it in a whatever more public way first. And so, maybe he included citations and just people who talked about it didn't. But actually, I assume he didn't include citations for that in particular because Yudkowsky himself couldn't find them.
Okay.
He gets credit for things that he gets credit for sharing ideas that like he didn't necessarily invent. But
Right.
I don't think there's anything wrong with popularizing them. But you're saying that the issue there is that people then assume that the idea must have come from him.
Right. And no, that's not the thing. Like, because he was on the Less Wrong forums at that time. He helped refine these things. Even he was part of the originating crew, right? Like, I got no beef with him. I got beef with the people who just automatically, reflexively are like, obviously, the dude with the degree who's a professor at one of the most prestigious universities is the one who came up with this. And keep perpetuating that so that it becomes truth in the public mind. That really annoys the fuck out of me. Maybe as a person with no degree myself, I feel this way, but like, I think the credentialing is such a nobility in the blood kind of thing that it annoys me.
It definitely certainly can be, huh? Because on the one hand, it's a useful heuristic. If someone's telling you about their cool new astrophysics theory for insert thing I don't understand, right? Dark matter, right? It's not unreasonable for me to ask what their credentials are. Because if it's like, oh well, they're homeless and they scream this from the street corner, 7 hours a day, then and they can't read, then I'm like, okay, well, I can kind of just not bother to read, to listen to the ramblings. Then I'm gonna go ahead and save my 7 hours. But if it's like, oh no, this person is a tenured professor at Oxford, then it's like, oh, okay, some again, nobles have deemed that this person has enough know-how to put them on their short list. So like it's a useful heuristic, but it's not. It's a heuristic for a reason. It's not a perfect rule, right? I guess I'm just agreeing with you.
Okay.
But I'm just pointing out that like I think it's a reasonable error for people to make, even if they're not like thinking in terms of like, well, you have to have a credentials to have an idea what you're talking about, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think certainly the rationalist community, more than other ones I'm involved with, like really don't give a shit about credentials. I don't know what Zvi's credentials are because it's never come up in anything that I've read of his or that he's talked about, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he's a doctor. I have no idea.
Right.
But it's like I'll still take his word on everything he's writing about COVID, things like that, where we're kind of past the you need this badge from this institution to be worth listening to.
Yeah.
Maybe because we have so many examples of people that clearly are smart that don't have those, and that people that do have those that say they're pointless, like Robin Hanson and who's the other George Mason guy? Why am I blanking on his name? Kaplan, that's the one.
Okay.
Yeah, Kaplan wrote the case against education.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And not only that, but also a bunch of people that we see that do have degrees that just say absolutely stupid shit.
Right. It is really funny to think about a professor writing a book that says there's no real point in coming to my class. I mean, I don't think that sentence is in his book, but it seems to be implied.
Yeah, that is a professor with some balls, man.
Yeah,
I respect that.
And professor with enough balls to tell his institution that like you're paying me for a job that really doesn't need to exist,
Right?
And I'm still collecting a paycheck. Do one thing to do it like once you retire or something, but this just brings to mind like kind of the other side of that coin of media attention, where it's like I think some people get more than they deserve for sometimes good reasons, sometimes bad reasons. Um, like Ray Kurzweil I mean, he was like the leading guy 20 years ago talking about whatever technology stuff in the popular culture, right? Because some of his stuff is like a little out there. It's kind of easy to dismiss everything that he's talking about as kind of in the domain of quackdom, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so it sort of does a disservice that way. I'm trying to think of like there's another example like Michio Kaku he was one of the people who kind of filled like Carl Sagan's shoes of public science communicator on TV.
Yeah.
And one thing I really didn't like about him, he a lot of things I did like. He's clearly smart. I think he's great at explaining stuff. He's clearly passionate. He has the mad scientist hair, which is great. What I didn't like is, and I remember noticing this before I even heard a conjunction fallacy, was like he would talk about things and give so many specifics of what technology will be like. And he's like, oh yeah, by this time, we'll have wallpaper that you can interact with, and this might have been before touchscreens, but like for him to give, and I can't remember all the specific details of the things that he's laying out, but I just remember that it was like way more than was warranted by the idea of like technology getting smaller, which was the thesis that he was, arguing for.
Yeah.
And I felt like he was doing a disservice there because like that hasn't yet come to pass, right? And so if you had just said, hey, things are going to get smaller, to get more and more tech that we have around us all the time, that's great. But then you add in all these specifics, well, then you're more likely to be wrong in your like super specific predictions. And then kind of your whole message gets, I think, just washed with the future historical fact of like you actually being wrong about the nitty gritty when you weren't wrong about the big picture. But then all people remember is that you're wrong.
Yeah, I think he started to get a bit more into like sensationalization too, like just making things even more than they really were, just because you got a lot of positive feedback for that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't get on TV for saying boring stuff.
Yeah.
And even
So
if it's boring, true stuff.
Right, so starting to maybe veer into stuff that is more questionable in its scientific veracity.
Yeah, and I can't blame him. And I think on net he's doing, or again, all my information here is over a decade old. I'm sure. I think he had a very net positive impact. It's one of those things of like it seems one of those perverse incentives. That's why I like podcasts that like Sam Harris's. Where like audience capture isn't really a risk because he doesn't really care about the numbers, but like the second that you start caring about your download count too much, and certainly once it gets big enough and you like want it becomes a revenue stream or something, then it's like, well, I better keep putting out what my audience likes. And then now I'm going to start doing, 7 things of whatever with a picture of my face with my mouth open, in this big grabby headline or something, right? Like every fucking YouTube thumbnail, right? Because well, that's what gets downloads. And so I think that's a common trap mode that is just kind of a bummer.
It is. And especially like, because does it actually work? I don't know. I guess
it
does
must
for a while. But who was it? We were talking recently with someone, I think, who said that like these things go in cycles. Like, remember the old top 10 lists, number 7 will shock you. Like those, everybody was doing that because they worked, but only for a while. After like a year, people got wise to like, oh, this is clickbait. There's nothing of value here. And they just stopped clicking on it. And so a while after that, they disappeared. And now you don't see very many of those anymore.
Yeah. I can't wait for that to happen with the people with their mouths open looking shocked on YouTube thumbnails.
I know. God.
And it's always like an exclamation mark and a question mark. And
yeah.
And it's like, no, I just want to watch the video on how do I fix the lining on my refrigerator, like
right. What I found behind this lining shocked me.
Yes. God, it's like reading recipes online. That's why I never do that anymore either.
Well, do we want to get into some of the feedback?
Yeah, for sure.
Matt, our current episode that I am recording with Stephen is a bunch of self-indulgent chatting about things that are interesting and listener feedback and things along those lines. We also talked about the poly episode a bit because Stephen wasn't there for that. And I was reminded that in the Discord, you said 2 things, which I wanted to get your opinion on right after that episode came out. The first one, no, not your opinion, but like dive deep a little deeper in there with
Sure.
you, if you are okay with that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. You posted, so far this episode has actually been meaningfully helpful in finally making it really click to me that, oh, people are just really different for real.
Yes.
which was first of all, a beautiful sentiment, but like how did that make it click? What was going on there?
Yeah. So I think the mundane way of phrasing it is just you go through life and you assume that everyone thinks about relationships and, gender and dating and what they're looking for out of life the same way you do. At least I feel like this is a common human tendency, and it takes data and updating to realize, like, oh no, people can be different in all of those ways that I just listed. And I'm probably like a fairly central example of like a monogamous oriented person, where like the thing that I have always like wanted out of life at a deep level, prior to even really asking myself the question, is just like, well, yeah, you date so that you can find the one soulmate, true love, person who will be your Princess Leia to your Han Solo, or whatever, whatever floats your boat personally. And the episode, as it went on, it was just really like hitting over and over from different angles this idea of like, no, Matt, not everyone is looking for that. They were never looking for that. It's not like they started out looking for that and then they gave up on it and decided to be poly. They just were never looking for that. They don't see relationships that way. They don't want the same thing out of life as you. And that was interesting. That was useful to me, because I had previously just been sort of bemused and befuddled by the whole poly thing, which I understand you're part of, and I was just like, okay, sure, like I get wanting to have like sex with people. That's not mysterious to me, but it's like, but what's the end game though, Eneasz? When are you going to settle down? And it's like, and it's just like, it was me kind of not getting the architecture underlying the behavior. I was assuming you had the same architecture as me,
yeah,
which made your behavior inscrutable. And now I'm just like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Okay, interesting. Is this like a general update on stuff that needed hammering, or like had you already assumed this in other domains and it just got expanded to this one?
Oh yeah, I think probably just got expanded to this one, or the axes on which people can be different from each other never occur to you until they're kind of shoved in your face, is one way of saying it.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand that people are different from each other, but you just, unless it's really forcefully brought home to you that this is a new axis on which you should consider that people are different from you, then you'll just not even see that as an axis. You'll just see that as like, well, yes, everyone feels this way. I mean, much like it's like everyone wants to not, die horribly. Like I don't think that's an axis along which people differ very much. So I don't feel a need to update on that one. But then there's like, oh, what people are looking for out of life when it comes to relationships and the opposite sex and so forth. It's like, oh yeah, that can vary quite a lot apparently. In fact, I just slipped in the opposite sex as if that's like a given. It's like, no, of course that's not a given. That's another variable along which people can vary quite a bit.
Yeah, fair enough. One of my early interactions with learning this thing about people being different is that, I don't know, this is going to sound just extremely, extremely stupid, I think, to a lot of people, but I was raised very much in the whole men and women are the same and there's like no differences between them sort of mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So at first I assumed that like women want the same thing men want. And so I at first tried to model behaviors that I found attractive in women, right? And as if that would draw women to me. And no, it turns out women like very different things than what men like. They want you to perform masculinity and doing other things along those lines, which was... I did not update very much from that. I guess I just kind of thought, oh, women are weird in the sex way that they want different things than I would want. But took a long time to generalize that particular insight.
Yeah, me too. I think that's fairly common. I mean, I think I see the same thing happening from the other side too, where very often women think that men want out of women what women want out of men. And that's not true either. So a lot of confusion here, actually.
Yeah. Terrible.
It is. It's just horrible. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we're getting somewhere as we get older in understanding things.
Yeah, it only took more than half of a normal average human life to get here for both of us. Great.
I sometimes get just a little bit of bitterness over the lies I was told, and I'm like, okay, they must have known this. Some people must have known this at some point, and I understand the good impulse of like, you got to treat everybody the same, and so we just tell our kids everybody's the same. But man, does it fuck you over in some ways.
I kind of see that as being an interesting segue to possibly the second thing you wanted to talk about.
Yes, you mentioned having this power.
Yes. Yes, it is possible to learn, but not for a Jedi. It's so do you want to? I almost want to hear you describe what you think I was trying to communicate, because I kind of feel like, as sometimes happens in Discord conversations, I was mostly failing to make myself understood.
This was almost the very next thing you posted, I believe. He says, it's been unimaginable to me that people can't just choose not to lust after other people when they are in nominally committed monogamous relationships. But this conversation is making me realize maybe not everyone has that brain switch.
Yeah.
You have a brain switch where you just aren't attracted to other people? What? What's going on?
Yeah, well, I mean, so first of all, calling it a switch is obviously a metaphor. Like it's a choice, and it's like probably just due to being raised in a very southern sort of you could call it an honor culture. I've often thought that of the different like cultures that Scott Alexander writes about, I probably come from a Cavalier culture, actually, which would be like honor, and like I would totally have duels if people would duel me and stuff. Not that I'm even endorsing this as like a way to live, or saying that it's moral. It's just like that's kind of
Right.
the way my psychology is structured. And so the idea is like, if you engage in the sacred ritual, the sacred ancient ritual of going steady with a girl, and you wear your gingham button down shirt to the county dance with them and so forth, you're like honor bound to do right by that woman, and that means you do whatever's in your power to not stray, and that includes stuff like don't look at pretty girls. In fact, try not even to notice that there is a pretty girl.
Okay, so I mean, I'm pretty much on board with all that, and I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
but also the whole don't look at pretty girls, it feels like the whole, I don't know, there are four lights almost kind of thing. Like how can you do that without just being in this constant prison of being afraid to look anywhere?
I don't. I think that I think you're not wrong. I think that a lot of human psychology often looks like a there are four lights situation. Like you and I were raised religious. There are a lot of there are four lights situations that arise in being religious, where you're like the most classic of which is just like, I felt myself just have a question about religion that felt vaguely blasphemous in my head just now. I'd better do everything I can internally to disavow that, or I'm going to burn in hell for eternity. So like, I only mentioned that sort of extreme example as a way of saying, like, I think we have a lot of machinery for like internal dissociation from things that we don't approve of. And it's not that unusual. So I'm not saying it's great, or like, I'm actually not, I'm also not saying this is a great way to be like a integrated and psychologically healthy human being necessarily. And I'm not even saying I'm like selling this as a way to be. It's more like, I thought everyone was like this prior to listening to y'all's conversation. Like I maybe hoped is a better word, which is interesting, because it's like I've found people who cheat just perplexing, because I'm just like, but couldn't you just not? Like, could you just have chosen to not go down that path beforehand? Like it just seems like a mistake. It seems like a very easily avoidable mistake, and because you had 10,000 opportunities to like I said, not notice the pretty girl was there, and then not look at her, and then not walk up to her and start up a conversation, and then not ask if you wanted to meet up in a hotel room later, etc.
Right.
And
no, I mean,
and I think
it's definitely a mistake, and there's certain steps that you have to take along the way. But you said something along the lines of, just like a little bit further up, you said, if you ask me, is X hot, I would still be able to say, yeah, according to objective beauty standards, but be able to avoid like feeling any particular way about that.
Yeah, I think that's true.
How could you not like be like,
well,
I guess this is my weird brain moment where you literally just don't feel any sort of attraction or desire?
I think that's accurate. I think that
like, this feels like something that requires 10 years in a monastery in the mountains to master.
I'm trying to, I wonder how much of this is just like different words for describing these like fuzzy mental handles we have in our heads that we never have occasion to explain to other people. But like, it seems to me very easy. Okay, so like, I've done more than my share of meditation and like IFS type practices and focusing and such. So like, I think I do have the right language for this. I'm just not sure if it will be accessible to other people. Like, so what happens is, like, in this hypothetical scenario we're imagining, where you have me in a laboratory, and I'm in this scenario in a super committed relationship, and then you show me, Scarlett Johansson walks in, and you're like, Matt, what is your internal experience in this moment? It would probably be like, well, like I sense like an arising felt sense, which is something like desire and attraction and lust and all of these things that you would sort of expect. But like noticing it as it arises, I just choose not to engage with it or give it any energy or give it any fuel or interact with it. And I just sort of stonewall it, and then it just sort of dies and goes away. And I just kind of, and then furthermore, like knowing that mental formation is there, I just kind of continue keeping it from arising. So it's not that there's not a transient sense of that thing happening. It's just that I do something about it very quickly on the time scale of like fractions of a second. And I don't think you need to be a master meditator to do the thing I just described. You do need to have meditated and done a bunch of ridiculous navel gazing work to have the words to describe what I just described. But regardless of that, that's basically what is happening in a person's head when they feel something and then clamp down on it and dismiss it.
Can you do that with any emotion?
Unless it's like super strong. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think so. I think most people can. Is the difference is like I think the disconnect in the conversation is that like I think this sort of thing is actually quite common, and like this is what double think is, or this is what like denying your inner sense of what is right and wrong looks like, which people do all the time. So they just don't see themselves doing it is the difference. They just feel like it's humans being in denial and being in conflict with themselves and so forth. It's kind of the human experience, right? It's just the goal. Like the goal is to sort of one way of articulating the goal of a lot of spirituality is to not have those internal inconsistencies, you could say. But
and so when someone is said to finally snap or whatever, that's when they encounter an emotion so strong that they can't do that, and it actually, I don't know, overwhelms them or something?
Yeah, sure. I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I think yeah,
that's a hell of a superpower.
I appreciate that. I still vaguely feel like I've failed to communicate, because it's like, well, I feel like you do something similar. You maybe just don't do it for romantic attraction, because for you weren't raised in a context where you were like, it was beaten into you that you needed to be able to master that part of yourself. Like,
I mean, I think they tried, and I just eventually rejected it. The Jehovah's Witnesses had a very strong, like, you shouldn't even date anybody until you are ready to marry, because that's what dating is for. And you aren't ready to marry anybody while you're still in college, so don't do any dating until college is over, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so you probably have like the normal amount of like male aggression. Is that accurate?
Yes, I would say yes. Overall, probably, sure. I do a lot of work, not acting on it though.
Yeah, well, and that's why I bring it up is like, I think you and I are probably, great nonviolent men, but that doesn't mean we don't have an impulse to punch somebody every once in a while that we don't act on. And so that it's not that much different from just like feeling that very strong, pre-verbal, pre-rational desire to do the animal thing in this moment and punch somebody or whatever it is, and just being like, no, we're not doing that. We don't do that. We don't endorse that. That's not me. And then that feeling goes away. And it's not like we then go home and like plot revenge. It's just like, that was a transient impulse. I don't need to act on that. It's not like, and it's not even like I feel like disappointed, and I'm like, oh man, I really wish I lived in a world where I could have punched that guy. It's like, no, that was just like a bad impulse. I'm not going to do that. And that's kind of the same space of what I'm trying to describe. It's just, while you have successfully tamped down on your violent impulses, I I'm just relating the experience of somebody who has done the same thing, but for like lust impulses or whatever. And I don't think it's that weird. I just think it's kind of interesting and one way of being different.
I guess I do think it is interesting. It sounds less mysterious and crazy when you explain it that way, rather than just like a switch of I can choose not to be attracted to people.
Yeah. And I think after saying maybe that poorly communicated framing in the first opening of the conversation, I tried to like contextualize and explain better, but I don't think I succeeded. But I feel like I got it across in this conversation.
Okay. Do you, just theoretically speaking, have any sort of intuition or any sort of feeling that, because the reason I am not violent when I feel anger is because I think that would be just a bad thing for me to do. On net, bad for me, bad for society, just in general. Don't do that. That's going to make things worse. Whereas on the other hand, like flirting with people, showing interest, having fun with them, maybe stepping it up to some sort of romantic involvement, nothing there is bad in any way that I can see. So I'm like, why would I suppress something that's just going to make everybody happy?
Well, so specifically, I mean, that's why I harp on the idea that you're in a committed relationship where, given the norms and expectations of that relationship and that person, it would be very hurtful to them if you were to pursue, the seeds of a relationship with someone else, which is what flirting, is. It's like you're kind of keeping your options open, and then and so like if this person over here has this reasonable expectation that I have given them, that I am going to be their partner and I am reliable and I'm going to behave, that we are agreeing to this monogamy thing together. I will expect you to be committed to me, and you can expect me to be committed to you. Then it would be, like literally unethical for me to be like, yeah, I said that, but that doesn't mean I'm not gonna like, like pursue it. If Scarlett Johansson, if it's Scarlett Johansson, I didn't, it's like, no, like you actually have to mean it if you're going to make that kind of commitment. I mean, the actual answer is I don't think people take commitment nearly as seriously as they should, considering that it is actually this very weighty promise. That like, if you're taking the idea of monogamous commitment as seriously as you should, then you should cultivate the ability to like turn off lust at will. Because if you can't, then you're just setting yourself up for like some uncomfortable situations and possibly failing at the commitment that you've made. And it's like that you're okay. You're just failing a Gom Jabbar as a human if you're just like, oh yeah, well I said I committed, but I guess I couldn't commit because I couldn't control myself. It's like, okay, well that makes me think less of you than if it's just like, the poly position is just like, no, there is no such commitment. So it's not like a failure. It's just like that commitment doesn't exist. So, it's fine.
Yeah. Like you can commit on all other axes without being like, and I don't kiss or, have sex with other people.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if you were going to go somewhere else with this, but the most interesting, personal thought that I had in that conversation for me was like the idea of the limerence pill. I don't know if anybody else cared about that at all, but I thought that was a fun thing to think about.
Go ahead and fill us in on the limerence pill then.
Just I think I slip it into the conversation somewhere, but it's like if there was a pill you could take that would permanently make you feel limerence for the person that you're dating, would you?
Can you redefine limerence real quick in case people don't know it?
Limerence is my personal definition is like the feeling of intense infatuation and puppy love and butterflies and almost sort of monomaniacal focus on your partner that you usually have in the first, like, depending on the person, months of a relationship. Apparently some people never feel limerence, and apparently some people literally feel it their entire lives.
I can't imagine any reason to not take that pill.
I can't either. I was, which is why I kind of thought it was interesting, because from my perspective, if you're really feeling limerence toward one person, then you would never want to date anyone else, because you would just be like, this is this is this is a goddess. Why would I ever need more than this? And like, I thought a very interesting thing in that conversation was somebody saying, no, I felt limerence for several people at once. And I was like, okay, that I don't understand. Like, in what you just said, you don't understand me having a brain switch that can turn off certain feelings. I don't understand the ability to feel limerence for more than one person. I've never even come close. Like, it feels inconceivable to me. I'm not calling this person a liar, by the way. I'm just saying it's the kind of thing where I'm like, wow.
I could totally see it, especially if those two people are like good with each other too, and like you can just all three go together, do things. I don't know. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I here on the verge of the singularity, I low key expect that there to be such a thing as like marriage, except also you both install a little firmware update on your Neuralink that means you feel a gush of endorphins and oxytocin every time you see your partner, meaning you are literally now incapable of falling out of love with them. I expect there will be pros and cons to this, but that doesn't mean people aren't going to try to do something like this.
Yeah. Real quick, seeing as you had for a long time a monogamous commitment, and I don't know, might be looking for another one, is it beyond a thing you would be willing to consider? Is it something that feels too like bad for you to, if you were to like be in a relationship where you have all the commitment stuff, but you're still free to, date around and sleep with other people and such, but you still have the all the other various life and emotional and so forth commitments?
So, and my way of phrasing your question is like, would I be open to polyamory as a concept? Is that kind of what you mean?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. It's not like a hard no, but it's more like that, kind of like I said earlier in the conversation, like the end game of what I would want out of a relationship would be something very romantic and possibly foolish and unrealistic, which is like committed monogamous devotion. And so it's like it's not like yeah, I mean, sure, a lot of what you just described sounds good in some ways, but also sort of like, it's like, does that road lead to the destination that I want to go to? And I mean, it's possible that it does. It's just like that's the question that interposes itself when I ask whether I'd be open to that kind of thing.
Okay. I mean, I've known people who have those sorts of things, so I think it's possible, but I strongly suspect that it's just a difference of neurological types, where some people literally couldn't get that feeling of commitment if they didn't have also sexual exclusivity, which I personally don't think is important, but I think some people do. Like, the one thing that sometimes annoys me is when people say like you have no commitment in your relationships or whatever, and I'm like, no, that's bullshit. You can have plenty of commitment in a poly relationship. You just don't have sexual exclusivity, which is not a thing that we care about, but seems to be intrinsically wrapped up in the idea for some monogamous people.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different way of being thing.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, that's like, I think it's just an interesting question to ask, what's intrinsic versus what's sort of learned, or like, beaten into you by your community, or just an assumption you never questioned, I don't pretend to have the answers. At most, I was trying to like, just express like, well, here's a way that I thought everyone was, that apparently not only is everyone not this way, but everyone else is confused at my expressing that I'm this way. So it's always good to discover these differences.
I think there were even a fair number of monogamous people who were like, what the hell are you talking about, that you don't feel attraction to other women?
Yeah, there were. And I was like, I honestly, like, not even joking, I was like, well, your life must be a lot harder than mine, because it sure is convenient to be able to just not have to worry about that. Like, right. Like, not totally. Like I don't have to worry if I'm in a committed relationship that I'm going to cheat. Like, I don't have to worry about that in myself. I just know, like, oh, I'm good. I don't know if they're good, but I'm good on my end. So
you found a hack that made things permanently easier.
Yeah,
it's the same way I feel about like being gay. Just just be such an easier life.
God, I've often felt this.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me, and I will try to wedge this into our already too long episode.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay. It's been ages since we've done like a decent amount of feedback. Remember when it used to be? I'm uploading some older episodes now to YouTube because the young kids these days listen to podcasts on YouTube, which is weird. Which also makes me think maybe we should do like a video version, but I don't really want to necessarily always look nice enough for a camera.
Yeah, there's also the fact that editing video is a whole other beast.
Oh yeah. All
But
right, F that.
I've got a background idea if we ever get around to doing it that will involve some video aspect of it. So
Okay.
we'll put that on the back burner though. But some listener feedback.
Yeah, but I just want to remember back in the day when we used to do like listener feedback every episode at the end of the episode for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think
was,
I think we had less of it back then, which was fun. That reminds me, because I wanted to say this episode and I forgot, and I don't want to forget at the end, even though it's more of an end of episode thought, is that like we've passed 200 episodes, mostly every other week for, how long does that put us out? Like, math with me here.
I believe we started in 2015.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming up on 10 years.
Yeah.
And
holy
so,
shit. Yeah, we are.
Like, it's just kind of fun to think about. And I was thinking about thoughts on the Bayesian conspiracy, on having done it for so long, and maybe this kind of was spurred on thinking about who gets credit for what idea, like the way the media treats Bostrom, even though it's not related to that at all. I guess I was just thinking like the fun of it has waxed and waned, but it's always it's always a positive experience, even though like the energy levels sometimes dip. I guess I was just thinking that like to me it's hugely rewarding that it's spawned enough stuff that like if the University of Bays and the Guild of the Rose, especially the Mind Killer, for example, like if those were the only legacies and no one ever remembered the Bayesian conspiracy, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of fun. Like these people would have gotten together and organized somehow, some other way, probably. But having maybe helped bring the Guild of the Rose into existence 6 months or a year earlier than it would have otherwise is awesome.
Yeah.
So it was just one of those kind of like reflective moments I was having a few days ago. But
it is a really nice thought, especially because it feels so weird. It's just you and me sitting around reading stuff and then talking about it. And I guess it doesn't feel like it's anything influential in the moment, but you add it up over 10 years, there's something there.
There seems to be a lot. And, it's kind of fun. How many other people started doing podcasts like Not Everything is a Clue?
Mm-hmm.
It was at least 3 or 4 different podcasts. I mean, not 3 or 4 different people.
Yeah.
And, that started because I ripped off the idea of We've Got Worm from Matt and Scott, right? Yeah. So it's like one of those just fun downstream effects of like, oh yeah, this sparked like so much enjoyment and fun for so many people going down so many years. It's just it's fun to have ever been a part of something like that.
It really is.
But I think I thought of that briefly because we used to do listener feedback at the end of every episode. I think it's because we had less feedback, because that was well before we had a Discord, and so all the feedback could be like an email or a comment on the post, and so then it was sometimes 1 or 2 comments an episode,
Yeah.
And now that we've got a lively community over at the Discord, it's a lot to keep up with. Anyway, Kuiper is at the top of our notes here.
Yeah, Kuiper, great dude, writes for video games. I met him at Vibe Camp, and also was one of the authors of one of the finalists of the ACX book review contest.
Nice.
So I don't know. I just wanted to give him a shout out because I think that's cool.
No, that's great. And this comment was from him, right? About the judicial episodes we had?
Yes. Kuiper points out that stocks, when you put the people up in the public place, locked up.
This is in response to your proposed idea of why don't we just like basically corporally punish people for crimes instead of locking them up for 30 years.
Yes, a whipping or possibly a removal of a finger or something like that. Kuiper says stocks, in addition to being physically uncomfortable, are also humiliation ritual. And then he had a number of thoughts about that without saying any more explicit value judgments, just thoughts about it. One of the things is it is deterrence, because being a public spectacle is very public and everyone can see that it is happening.
I think that's why whippings and canings tend to happen in public too.
Yes, absolutely. Also, it has reputational effects, which is part of the deterrent, because if you spend all day, out in public locked up with a sign saying I didn't pay my debt, it's going to be harder to find people to loan you money after that. So even more reason not to renege on a debt. He says that one of the interesting things is that there is sometimes downstream effects of this, that maybe if you're putting stocks for something minor like a public drunkenness, then you got a funny story to tell at the future. Where on the other hand, if it's a more severe offense, then you got to deal with being a known thief.
Yeah, people talk about, spending a weekend in jail, for Kyle Kinane, the comedian, had a album titled this way, and or had an album titled Whiskey Icarus. And he talked about in that special how he got a DUI, and he says Whiskey Icarus flew a little too close to the sun. So like that can be just kind of like a funny time of, and so he's like, so they put me in a little room and took away my shoelaces, and I got to think about my life.
Nice.
So you're right. In those, it can be kind of like a funny, oh yeah, I had a really shitty weekend in the stocks. Can you believe it? Versus like, again, I beat somebody almost to death and I was in the stocks, right?
Yeah. I think this next part is one of the most interesting parts to me about this idea. He says that another way in which the community gets to participate and decide in the victim's punishment. A day in the stocks can be made more or less pleasant by the amount of jeering or rotten food thrown at you. Alternatively, the number of people willing to stop by and offer you food or water. The community can effectively veto a sentence and decide not to participate in your humiliation if they feel you don't deserve it, or do things to ease your suffering. Viewed in a positive light, one could describe this as democratic.
I really like that. I could imagine factions that would do that for like everybody.
Yeah.
And kind of like the opposite of the kind of like the Hell's Angels showing up to shut up to counter the Westboro Baptist Church at military funerals.
Mm-hmm.
It's just you get a brigade of local volunteers who hang out in a circle the whole weekend or whatever with the person who's stockaded in the stocks or whatever. Setting out their iPad for them to watch and giving them food and drink and stuff. There'd probably have to be rules about how much their people are allowed to do that or something, because like it has to stay a punishment.
Yeah,
but I could totally see that happening. I really like that.
That is the one that made me most not sure about this, because on the one hand, I do think it's really important for a community to have some sway as to no, this was a total injustice and we can make it better, or wow, this guy did not get punished enough, gotta fucking make it worse because fuck that dude for what he did. But like also the community generally doesn't go to the trial and see all the evidence laid out, and many times it might just be an extra punishment on someone who is unpopular for no good reason, or a extra light sentence for someone who is popular because they're attractive or some shit, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a double-edged sword for having that sort of involvement. I mean, we kind of have that now. It's just the people are usually all behind bars, but I'll still never. I every time I think this thought or say it, I always catch myself because I never want to give up. But I was about to say I'll still never quite understand how Ted Bundy had women outside the prison protesting his execution. So because to say I'll never understand is just as a failure of imagination, and if I put enough effort into it, I should be able to at least understand everybody, right? To at least a little. But like that seems weird. And so if he was stockaded instead of in prison, he'd have a harem of devotees, bringing him nice food and hanging out, like. Mm-hmm. Whereas a less attractive serial killer wouldn't have that. So that seems like a mixed externality there.
Yeah. So I don't know. Just a bunch of interesting things about the idea to think about.
Yeah. And this last bullet point that he had in there too was one that I thought of as well, as like, people could escalate the punishment to more serious forms of violence, rocks instead of rotten food. But he says that doing so was usually prohibited. After all, the offender had been sentenced to public humiliation, not public whipping. And so, it does raise the question, some people take justice into their own hands now, a la punching Nazis or throwing milkshakes at politicians or whatever. And some of those I think are more acceptable than others, but it's just one of those things of like, well, maybe that's why it's not done this way. It gets twisty. Doesn't mean that it's worse than what we have now. It means that it would have its own set of problems.
Yeah.
Well,
I had a second follow-up here about the whole punishment episode thing.
Okay. We'll see if I am inspired to digress the way that I was thinking about after this one.
Okay. This comes from Istand Leet, and I'm going to skip most of it, but the context was in terms of the guy that you were on the jury trial for, who was convicted for shooting at or around towards a dude that he was beefing with that was dating his ex, and that had just made some sort of threatening comments about his paternity rights to his child.
That was my speculation. We didn't know why he did it. We don't know what the guy said. If I didn't make that clear, I absolutely should have.
I thought it was in the texts that he said something about like, don't threaten my relationship with my daughter or something.
The fact that the father felt threatened, whether it was by this guy or by his girlfriend, it's unclear. All we know, all that was known in the courtroom was that there was some communication between the new boyfriend and the father / the defendant a couple hours before the incident, and then we got like the specific texts coming from the defendant saying, stay up, I'm coming over, except put less eloquently, etc.
So I had assumed that like you knew it was because he had like threatened custody or something. It could have just been something like, I'm not going to give you the drugs you paid for or some shit.
It could have been. There was an anecdote, or there was, I guess, a piece of testimony about, it was like the daughter's kindergarten graduation or something, and the new boyfriend was there, and then he was beefing with the new boyfriend there about that, or at least at the time. But since the defendant never said anything, it was, we never got a deep dive into anything that we didn't have like actual text message records of.
Okay.
Yeah, if I said that came out as like fact, I definitely regret that. It was our speculation that it, what could have coerced this guy who just the weekend prior had served his ex-wife or his ex-girlfriend with custody paperwork for his daughter. What could have possessed him to go over there and shoot at the house, a week later? And we just assumed that the daughter was the berserk button that the new boyfriend kept poking, intentionally or not. Like, why did the defendant do it was never brought up because the defendant never admitted to doing it.
I mean, given that some people will shoot at others over the results of a soccer match, like I can see how a reasonable person would have been like, as a reasonable person, I could only be driven to this if someone threatened my relationship with my daughter. So maybe that's what he was doing. But I know a lot of dudes out there will just be like, how dare you bad talk my football team? I'm gonna shoot at you.
Some of the details are hazy now. This was in August and it's now January. But some of the texts from the girlfriend to the defendant immediately after were talking about like, now you're never going to see your daughter and stuff.
Okay.
Good luck with your custody after all this or something. And so it was a reasonable inference that had something to do with the kid, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll re-listen to that episode and see if I had a piece of evidence I'm forgetting or something.
No, maybe I'm just extrapolating too far out of too little information, which I do sometimes.
But now we can run with it for hypothetical.
Yes.
For the rest of
anyway,
Stanley's point. Yeah.
Yes. So what it all came down to is that his prison sentence seemed like a whole lot, and we were like, "Wow, that seems like a lot." And then we were talking about potential other punishments that wouldn't put him in prison for decades. Stanley says, given that in particular the guy we're talking about is more reproductively successful than either host so far, and Eneasz's point about poor life outcomes for children of fathers who commit crime, is taking him out of the gene pool for his reproductive years better for society than corporal punishment?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that I think could never land politically. Certainly not today. Not in 21st century America, but in a Star Trek style future where it's like not quite utopian, but we've more or less got our shit together. I could totally see that being a thing, right? It's like, look, you convicted your second violent crime. That's it. We're sterilizing you.
Yeah.
And it would be impartial and fair and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
It happens to be right now that there's a disproportionate number of people per rate of like base rate in the population committing crimes, and there's lots of, I think, when I say good reason, I don't mean good reason to commit crimes. I mean good reason that a life of crime has come to them, and so to implement that now would really just mean going around sterilizing a lot of people, a lot of minorities, and that's super fucked up. So, that's.
Huh. I had just, I don't know, maybe half a year ago, read someone putting forth the proposal. I don't know how long ago they put this proposal out, but I just saw it half a year ago, that a lot of the reduction in crime in Europe over the middle Renaissance ages period to the present day was because they just started executing the fuck out of people. They're like, all right, you committed a couple violent crimes, boom, you're dead, no more. We're tired of this shit. And that they eventually managed to remove the most violent, criminally prone genes from the gene pool, since everything is heritable, including tendency to violence. And that, I thought that was an interesting point at the time, but now that he mentions it, like, on the one hand, that I do sort of want there to be less crime in society. On the other hand, I saw a counterpoint that, like, you're not just removing violent crime when you remove the people with those genes. There's also other things that are being removed along with the package, and maybe that is reason that a lot of people in Northern Europe seem to be more risk averse, less willing to be agenty, and more prone to falling into socialism and other stagnation traps. So
Yeah, I mean, not being a historian or a genetic biologist,
right, all this is wild speculation.
Right. I guess I'm just thinking that, like, if we started killing drunk drivers, we'd probably see a lot less drunk drivers, not because there's a genetic propensity to drink and drive, but because people would be like, oh, okay, this is a real punishment,
Well, also there's a genetic propensity to drink. Just period. Some people do not like it, and some people really love it. And I would bet that drunk drivers are disproportionately the people who really love it. And over a couple centuries, you could get rid of a lot of the genes in the gene pool that really like alcohol if you did that. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, just that it is a thing that would happen.
It seems possible. Again, I feel like there's so many factors that go into basically everything that I don't know if it's as easy as all that. But but in theory, for sure, put it another way, could we specifically breed a population intentionally that whatever hates alcohol? Totally, right? We could do that probably with just a couple centuries worth of effort if the whole planet wanted to orient towards that goal, right? But yeah, I think the idea of getting these people out of society for the reproductive years, I mean, I guess that's one maybe benefit. The thing is, I don't know how much of the crime, this actually does segue kind of nicely into the tangent I wanted to go into last time we talked about this, but we had already talked long enough, was like, I don't know how to get started on this. I mean, the thing is like, the deck was so much stacked against this guy, whether him in particular or insert another generic black defendant in 21st century America, right? Like, I mean, the overt stuff, that gets trumpeted sometimes too much to the point of just being disingenuous. But there's also just like the subtle stuff that is, I think, inarguable. This is just, and I don't have any papers to cite or whatever to back up. So maybe I'm totally wrong here, but I'm pretty sure I'm right that young black kids are seen as more adult than their peers. Therefore, they're more responsible, even though they're both 14.
This guy was like 30 though, right?
No, I know. I'm just talking, but as a 14-year-old, he is treated this way, and they're perceived as scarier because again, they seem more mature, or they're perceived as more mature. There's just like a lifetime of just bullshit weighing down, and again, it doesn't excuse anything. It just makes it like less clear to me that this is a genetic problem that could be bred out, and more like a society thing that we need to keep working through.
Right.
Like my wife has a coworker who has a son, and I think he's 16. When he was 15, he was in the car near his high school with some classmates who were vaping, and they all get admonished except for him, who gets like hauled in by the school resource officer and charged with illegal drug use or illegal substance use on school property, and had to go to court twice.
No.
And he was the only one in the group, and he also wasn't vaping at the time. He was in the car with kids who were.
Jesus.
But and like, yeah, this is one anecdote, but I think that the summation of a lot of people's lives is just lots of these anecdotes. And so it's not saying, well, therefore, if this kid turns to shooting up his ex-girlfriend's house or whatever, that makes sense. It doesn't make sense in a way that, like, again, excuses anything. It's just like, him doing it, the defendant in the case that I was on, it wasn't as insane as you doing it or me doing it, right? Like, it was as wrong, but it wasn't like, we're judging it from like where we were. We're like, how dumb would we have to be to think that was a good idea? And it's just like, I don't know, this guy had almost 3 decades, I guess, of being treated in such a way that I think. Am I getting across any point? If I have a
I
point, I think I'm dancing around it.
yeah,
Not
no,
because I am refusing to touch it, just because I can't quite find exactly what I'm trying to say.
I think I understand what you're saying. I also think I disagree though, mainly because if I recall correctly, you probably also grew up fairly poor, right?
Um, Lower middle class. Like we never really wanted for stuff. But my parents drove old shitty cars. My dad's car kept the windows up with doorstop. But
Okay.
when I was in junior high, my mom started working and had a very generous boss, and then things were turning around for them too. But so I wouldn't say poor, no, but yeah, lower end of middle.
I see a lot of things along the lines of, well, of course, poor areas have more crime. Like when you're poor, you just do more crime because of how much being poor affects you on a, I don't know, mental level or psychological level or some shit. And like when I was younger, I accepted that. I was like, yeah, oh, of course, your life is terrible. You can't help but act this way because you're so stressed out and all this shit. But then like I got old and I was like, "Ugh, that just seems racist against poor people. Just because you're poor doesn't mean that you lose the ability to know right from wrong and know like what is okay to do and what is just evil. Like when I was a toddler, my parents, I mean, they literally came over. They left Poland with a few suitcases of clothes and as much cash as they could get for selling things on the gray market in Poland before they left. Like I was eating school lunches, breakfast and lunch, the free ones, because we qualified for the subsidy. Like we definitely got a lot of help from the government and from our church, but we were legit poor for quite a while. And my parents crawled out of that, and they never broke the law, as far as I know.
Other than zoning
Certainly,
laws, rebuilding, improving houses and stuff.
right.
They never,
Aside from maybe zoning
yeah,
laws.
they never broke a law worth having.
You're right. And like not only that, but they raised us and taught us in a way where like I would have considered those kinds of things basically unthinkable. The only time I started thinking, yeah, we should like riot and burn down all of society and everything was when I went to high school and I was surrounded by other like revolutionary socialist sort of teenage punk boys, and they weren't poor. Is the thing. They were angry punks, and I'm fine with that. I was an angry young teenage male too, but I don't think just saying someone had a hard life and was poor is like, so obviously it's understandable when they shoot at people. Like, no, that is so dismissive of the fact that poor people also have agency and can know what is good and bad and
Yeah,
aren't just at the mercy of their environment.
no, for sure. I think that some people are. I mean, we're all at the mercy of our environment, but I think some people's environments are less merciful,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone has the agency to do whatever they can, but they only have so much elbow room within the constraints of whatever their life is. Like when you and I were kids, we probably got a talking to from my parents explaining that if ever you're not feeling safe or there's something's dangerous is happening and we're not around, you can call the police and they'll come help.
Mm-hmm.
There are a good number of kids growing up in the country now and then who are like, no matter what happens, never call the police.
Right.
Not
And
because those parents are wrong, but because those parents are right. Because for
I
them, their
disagree.
circumstances way different.
Now I think those parents are wrong and they're teaching a bad thing.
I would. I guess I'm curious why you disagree.
Because cops, when they come to help kids, are actually going to help the kids. They're not going to endanger the children. I mean, I can see like if there's something illegal happening in the house that the parents might tell the kids, don't call the cops. Or more likely, if cops are seen coming to a house in this sort of neighborhood, then the neighbor's going to be like, oh shit, there's snitches in that house. We got to like retaliate somehow. Um, but I don't think that there's danger from the actual cops if a child is feeling threatened to call them.
I think it depends, and certainly, but I mean, maybe if it's not even the cops, maybe it is the narc thing, right?
Hmm.
But then it's just a matter of like, as a kid, you don't get to choose where you grow up,
That's
So like,
that's true.
if you grow up in that kind of environment, then it's like it's shaping, and it does depend. Again, like to be clear, I'm not parroting the popular but incorrect line that unarmed Black people are shot at a rate that is drastically disproportionate to the number of crimes that are being committed. Right?
Hmm.
It's but there is a maybe this has to do with the perceived adultness of younger minorities, but it's like, a 14-year-old, some of them look really young, some of them don't, of any
Mhm.
kids, right? Uh,
Mhm.
I was watching last night. There's the Great British Baking Show, which I really like, and there's some kids version, and these 9-year-olds can just bake circles around anyone I know. It's amazing. Um,
Cool.
but even among them, there are ones that look like they're, and I'm bad at guessing how old kids are, but some that look 8 and some that look 15.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not sure how old they are, but I don't think that they have people that are half the age of others competing. So
Yeah. I've legit seen people who I would have assumed were like early adults and found out later they were early teens. I was like, holy shit, that's crazy.
yeah, and so I think just being treated that way by not just the police, not just your peers, but also your teachers, your everybody. So like then when I'm goofing around being a stupid kid, I'm just being a stupid kid, but they're being a stupid young man who should have known better, right?
I don't know. I don't know if it really has. I don't know how big the impact that you're talking about is, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess maybe I should. It's weird. I was gonna say like maybe I should just talk to more people who actually grew up in that circumstance. But then it feels like tokenizing, you know, uh, like well, not tokenizing. It there's something weirdly uncomfortable about it. Like, hey, you might have had a rough life growing up. Could you tell me about it to see if my thoughts here are right? There's got to be a more eloquent way to start that conversation. Maybe I can just Google. I'm sure people wrote books or blog posts
I
or something. But
I mean, I think as long as you're friends with someone, you can totally do that.
yeah, that's fair. And but actually, that when I mentioned people writing blog posts, I remember one from back in the this would have been 2010, give or take 2 years. I remember reading an article. It might have been called like "Shuffling My Feet" or something. Um,
Yeah, that's a really good one.
oh, so it wasn't just some edge thing I found. It was popular, or at least we both found
Mhm.
it. Um,
Mhm.
if I recall correctly, it was a larger black dude who wrote this thing, and he talked
Mhm.
about to not make people nervous, he walked louder than he needs to, so he never surprised people when he came up on them.
Yeah.
And like the idea that like someone would be scared seeing you coming isn't something that many of us have to live with, right?
So, I mean, I don't know about you, but I do the same thing because I am a male and I'm, larger. I'm over 6 foot. When I see single women walking, I am very aware that they might feel threatened by that. So I do try to do a similar kind of thing.
Yeah, but I mean I think the difference is I guess maybe twofold.
Oh, yeah, he's probably seen as a bigger threat because of his skin color. Yeah.
Right, and he has to do it around everybody.
Okay.
And I wonder, it could be to an
Does he
extent.
do it? Never mind.
Again, I read it
Yeah, yeah, long
around when
time.
you did sometime in the
Mhm.
2000 aughts, but just the idea that like, oh yeah, I always have to live my life in such a way that like I make sure I'm expressing to everybody all the time that I'm not a threat. That just seems like a whole level of bullshit that again you and I are lucky to not have to deal with. Um,
Again, I'm going to say I have done this for many, many years, not around everybody, but around women.
I mean, I sometimes do to an extent. I'm also, I'm 5'8", so I'm less threatening. I'm more of the kind of like whatever, try not to draw attention kind of person. Um, but my general vibe of if I was taking the train at night or something, coming home from work or whatever, I would like just be looking at my phone the whole time,
Yeah.
and like that was my version of quote unquote walking loudly. Would just be like I'm clearly not even paying attention to you.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, one of the things I really liked about that article is that he pointed out that if you're on the phone and talking, then people feel much more comfortable because you're distracted. You're obviously like with someone who can hear what's going on the other side of that. And so sometimes he would just pull out his phone and act like he's talking into it. I was like, holy shit, that's great advice.
I wonder too, just as a mm, possibility that like you're overestimating the amount of fear that you put into people just because you've been around a handful of girls or of women who proclaim that they think all men are scary, whether they
Hmm.
believe it or not. I guess what I'm saying is it's possible that his behavior is more warranted than yours, given the amount of shit that people ascribe to the two of you, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I don't think I made a really eloquent point here, other than just saying like I was thinking about because you'd asked when we talked about that why I felt extra bad because the defendant was black, and like that's part of the reason
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
like it just because we didn't go through his childhood, that wasn't relevant to the case, but I'm willing to just bet from probabilities that like it was not the childhood that I had.
I want to clear up real quick, just in case there was any confusion. I absolutely 100% agree that it sucks to be viewed as a predator by the wider society. And as a black man, he would get that more than I get it. So it sucks even more for him. And I completely agree with that, and that has been my experience too. Like, I got no objection there. My main thing that I'm saying is that, like, there's a lot of things about reality that suck, and we do the best we can to deal with them. And I don't know, you do what you can.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. So this is just kind of where I think about just like the amount of freedom that some people have. You know, like Uday Hussein would apparently, I heard, drive around to, you know, weddings that were happening, and then, you know, have his dogs eat the groom and then rape the wife or something, right?
Jesus.
But this guy was Saddam Hussein's son.
Yeah.
So like, what fucking chance did he have to be a good person, right? Less
I don't
than you
know.
and me. Um, there's
Yeah.
an amount of blank slateism, and then there's just amount of like
I mean, I
this was
understand.
your environment growing up. Like, I think some people can overcome that, but they have to overcome it as opposed to just like accept it, right?
No, I understand what you're saying, but also it sounds almost like you're saying, and therefore I should feel kind of bad for him or give him some slack or something.
I'm only saying the first one.
That I should feel kind of bad for him.
That I feel bad for him. Not that you,
Oh,
not
that you
not
feel
that
bad
anyone
for him.
should.
Okay.
I feel terrible for Uday Hussein. Like, you know, it. I also feel worse for the people that he victimized.
Right.
But
There's a
that
level.
guy's life sucked. You know.
I Okay.
I mean,
There's a certain level of empathy that I just cannot have. And sure, maybe his life sucked for whatever reasons, but I've come to the point where, like Dumbledore, I just cannot care.
Well, when you put it that way, now I'm forced to think about it harder. Um,
Sorry.
no, that's good. Because I think Dumbledore was at the point with a particular evil person, right? Um, and a person who was at the moment threatening him. Not like looking back, you know, historically. You know, I think that if Voldemort was dead, you know, Dumbledore could sit there and be like, man, if only, you know, he didn't have all these things that happened to him, he could have been a good person, right?
Mm.
I think that's totally a thought Dumbledore would have had if he had had time to reflect when the crisis was over. But yeah, in the event of an emergency, I would like to think that I'm prepared to. You know, I'm not a violent person, but I'd be prepared to dish out whatever violence necessary, irrespective of my philosophical waxings on, you know, this person's lack of freedom in their actions, right?
Well, in that particular scene, I don't think Dumbledore felt threatened at all because he thought that, like, he's in my trap. I got him. He is powerless now, and he's about to be extinguished from reality. So now I'm just talking with him.
That's a good point. Maybe he was just
Yeah.
sick of Voldemort's shit.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean that's an interesting point. I Again, just to gigantically qualify this that I'm or gigantically asterisk this that I'm not really qualified to talk about much of this. Like I'm not a huge believer of like you need to live the experience to be able to talk about it.
Right.
But you do need to live the experience to be able to talk about it intelligently,
Hmm.
you know, or at least again, everything I'm hearing, everything I'm saying is stuff I've heard from people. I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not talking about my own life because that wasn't my life, you know. So there's a level of like because I hate the idea of saying, well, no, you have to live it to understand it. Because like if that's the case, then then everything is hopeless. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we can't all
Mm-hmm.
live each other's lives, but we should all be able to understand and work with each other. But
It's a really
there's
damn good point.
there's a level to it that is valid, even if it's not as valid, even if it doesn't run all the way to, well, we'll never understand each other, right?
Yeah.
Like I think I can pretty well put myself in the heads of the guys, you know, who ravaged that music festival in October. You know, it
Huh.
doesn't take that many steps for me to get there. Just imagine being raised in a religious death cult where you believed, not only did you believe God existed, but you believed that this was like the highest reward, the highest action one could do is to strike down infidels. Like if you really grow up in that kind of mindset, like
Yeah, but not just strike down the infidels, but to rape and to torture infidels and to have fun while doing it.
they're subhuman monsters who make the world a worse place for being there. You know,
I
like
I still would not
now
enjoy raping
before
and
someone
torturing them.
soundbites that, I'm saying that I believe that's what's going on in the
Yeah.
minds of the people who committed those crimes, those
Yes,
atrocities. Yes.
Yes.
I think that, you know, if you're raised hard, if you know, with enough pressure on you from childhood, it's a matter of overcoming that. It's not a matter of just like being the baseline good person, you know?
Right. It's like the orcs. They are subhuman. They you'd have to exterminate the orcs so that the rest of us can live at all in any sort of decency. But like
Do you have to have fun with it?
you're right, the joyful slaughtering and raping and like
I think
I cannot put myself in that place.
the disanalogy there, though, is that I think that, you know, the difference between killing a band of orcs because, you know, they're a danger to the world and they're subhuman versus killing the band of orcs that killed your village, you know? And it's like, I kind of get why someone might feel great rampaging that band of orcs, right?
Like, okay, so like to make this like literally subhuman, if there's a band of wolves, say, that tore through your village and tore apart your sister or your lover or whoever, and you go out afterwards and you track down these wolves and you exterminate them so they can't harm a village anymore, do you like also have fun tormenting them and ripping them apart and raping them and like that?
Revenge against what? The whale? No, I think I'd get on with my life.
Right. I understand needing to exterminate them.
That's
but
a reference to Eneasz's one-line rap fic of the old man, or wait,
Moby Dick.
Moby Dick.
Yeah.
No, I think that there's a level, once you get so far below human, that the idea of enjoyment is pointless. But if you believe that the people that you're attacking authored their decisions in any meaningful way, and they're just bad people,
And they deserve this kind of thing.
yeah, then you're like, if you feel like you're meting out justice, you're not meting out justice if you kill the wolf that killed your family. You like not in any real way.
No, I'm going to go right now and say I'm not going to even try to empathize with something like that, because that gets me one step closer to becoming that sort of person and wanting to take revenge on the people who did that kind of thing in that same sort of way. And I don't want to get myself closer to that.
That's interesting, because I don't feel the least bit inclined towards that sort of conduct, right? Despite me thinking that I might have something like a halfway decent model of what's going on in their heads. All it does for me is make me not feel awesome when we drop revenge bombs on them, right?
Okay.
Like, after 9/11, the resultant discourse was a lot of like, nuke them into the Stone Age, the lot of them, right?
Yeah.
And that didn't really seem, even at the time, like a helpful perspective. But it was like, it was understandable as the culture, having just been hit by this group, right? By vaguely this group gestured, in the rough direction of the other side of the planet, right?
Yeah.
And so, just because I understand the impulse doesn't mean that I the least bit will condone or sympathize with it.
I think maybe the thing is that I have expectations of humans, and so if I really get myself to empathize with a point and see them as fellow humans, I now expect certain behaviors from them, and if they do the exact opposite of that, I am so enraged and disgusted that I would want revenge in a much more personal way than if, like, I thought of them as less personed, more like objects. Like, these are foreign peoples, they have their foreign ways. Yes, we must, destroy their society or whatever for our own protection, but I'm not going to take emotional solace in any of that. Whereas if I think of them as people, I'm like, as people, you should know better. I feel like it is unfortunate that I have to wipe out the wolf colony. I feel enraged that a human did this to me.
I think I understand. And it's interesting because, like, sort of like as a, not defense mechanism, as a preservation mechanism, both offensive and defensive, you're kind of having to subhumanize them.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, their conduct has demonstrated that they're not worthy of the, that they're closer to the wolf category and not the human category.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from there. It's interesting. There was one piece of feedback, as long as I want to pivot.
Yes, let's do that.
Although I wonder, it's a little long.
This is Gorky's thing?
Yeah. This was a comment on the Patreon post. Bonus episode content. No, this is bonus, so I don't know how much of this I want to put out on the public feed.
I see. You know what? We've been going for almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
Do you want to come back and do this one at a later day and we can put it out as a bonus episode?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, that would be interesting. Totally.
Cool. Okay, I'll do that.
All right.
All right, then in the meantime, do we want to do the less wrong posts?
Sure. Yeah, let's do that.
Let's just totally whiplash and talk about the less wrong posts.
All right.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, I try to have, compassion for everybody, and realize that if someone's an evil person, it's fault aside, it's a sad thing that they're an evil person. It's sad for them, it's sad for the world, and it's sad that now we've got to kill you,
Yeah.
I feel like this rambled a lot, but that was the point of the episode. So I hope I didn't come off too inarticulate or say anything, that put my foot too firmly in my mouth. But
no, it's cool.
All right. Well, we have the second law of thermodynamics and engines of cognition.
Yes. All right. When did you read these?
Last week.
I read this yesterday, and I was like, all right, I can, it says at the top, like 11-minute read. I'm like, I can read this. I can take some notes. Obviously, it's going to take me a little longer because it always does when you're trying to analyze and take notes. But I'll be in bed by midnight. Listeners, I was not in bed by midnight. I spent a lot of time trying to grok the second law of thermodynamics and engines of cognition. I think I'm just too dumb for this post because I can follow each of the individual arguments that he makes in it. Each paragraph taken on its own makes sense. I can digest it. I got it. But like, I cannot draw all the different parts of it together to form a coherent story, a coherent line of thinking, just like a coherent whole. It doesn't work for me, and that worries me that there's some sort of, it's like when you put a whole bunch of drops of water together and all of a sudden you're shocked that there's fluid dynamics, or when you put a whole bunch of neuronals together, all of a sudden you're shocked that there's consciousness. Like this, I was not able to integrate all of the parts of this. And so much like the proof that shows 1 equals 0, because you cannot see all the parts of it and see where the error is, I'm worried there might be a divide by 0 error somewhere in this post that I cannot see because I cannot grok it all.
You know, speaking of not being able to see something, I need to just clarify something. The last episode that we released was 202, the Center for AI Policy, right?
Yeah.
In that episode, it says the next sequence posts are searching for Bayes structure and conditional independence and naive Bayes.
What the fuck? Did I read the long ones?
One of us did. Either you posted the wrong ones or read the wrong ones. Because I read the other ones. I didn't read this one.
That is... Shit. I'm sorry.
Oh, I mean, it's not a big deal. Perpetual motion beliefs. I tell you what, why don't you explain this one to me? I remember perpetual motion beliefs, I think.
Okay.
So I read the wrong 2 episodes, or wrong 2 posts, because the wrong 2 ones are posted in the episode description. And neither of us remember what we said we were going to read, so good luck to everybody. But this week we are talking about the second law of thermodynamics, engines of cognition, and perpetual motion beliefs is the second one. And I remember the second post. I don't remember the first from when I read it before. And Eneasz is going to try to explain it to me, and I'm going to do my best to learn as quickly as possible.
Okay.
All right.
Alrighty. So let's see how I can do this. The first thing I drew out of it at the top is that the first law is the conservation of energy. Energy is conserved in each individual interaction of particles. And thus, by mathematical deduction, no matter how large an assemblage of particles may be, the same applies. So unless you can explain how one wheel violates the laws of physics, an assembly of wheels can't do it either. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so far so good.
Okay. Just real quick to blow my own horn, not to blow my own horn, to be sort of an ass about the consciousness thing. If one neuron can't like tap into a magical consciousness thingy, and a whole assemblage of them couldn't either, right?
I was going to say yes, except for maybe not. To be clear, I'm not positing that there is some magic, other thing that, is above and beyond physics that comes out of enough neurons. I'm just saying that there's something to that bundle of neurons and what's happening inside of it that is different than what's happening inside of my phone.
Definitely different from what's happening inside of your phone, but what's happening inside a bundle of neurons can be reduced to what is happening to each individual neuron and the effect it has on the individual neuron it is connected to, right?
Yes and no. I'm not a big fan of the word emergence, but there's something about, like a single atom or single molecule of water not telling you everything there is to know about steam, ice, and, sublimation.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe if I knew all the other laws of physics, I could deduce that from a single water molecule, but
right.
Since I don't, and neither analogously, neither do I know that about the brain.
Yeah.
I think that there's the word emergent properties there is one should be mindful of, but is sort of appropriate.
All right. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
All right. Let's keep rocking.
All right. Keep rocking. Next thing he says is that the first law cannot prohibit converting heat into work. You can, in fact, build a sealed box that converts ice cubes and stored electricity into warm water. He says it isn't even very hard, which is true. So it couldn't violate conservation of energy as such if you did it the other way around. A box that turns warm water into ice cubes plus stored electricity. He says that is prohibited by the second law of thermodynamics. Second law is essentially Bayesian in nature. In the development over time of any closed system, phase space volume is conserved. Do those words mean things to you, Stephen?
I would have to squint and make up a definition, but I'll let you go ahead and tell me.
It draws an intuitive line right back to the first law where the combined energy of a system is conserved. The total energy level is conserved. Here it's the total volume being conserved. And like it just feels natural. It feels mirrory. There's a symmetry to it that tickles this is what the universe is right and should be, and it is good part of my brain, which I tend to trust a bit.
Yeah, no, I can take it.
All right. So, okay, explaining phase space. Let's say you're holding a ball high above the ground. We describe the state of affairs as a point in multidimensional space, at least one of whose dimensions is height of the ball above the ground. I believe we talked about this in earlier posts. So phase space in physics speak means that there are dimensions for the momentum of the particles, not just their position. A particle would have 3 dimensions for its position and 3 dimensions for its momentum. The 3 being the X, Y, and Z axis position and X, Y, and Z axis momentum. As an example, going back to the tennis ball thing, the phase space volume would be the height is 10 and the energy is 0, so it has a certain volume. As the distance to the ground decreases, the velocity relative to the ground increases, and so while one is going down, the other one is going up, so the total volume is conserved in this multidimensional graph that we're thinking of. Does that make sense?
It's starting to fuzz a bit. It seems needlessly convoluted way to describe what's happening there. I would talk about it in terms of, I think this could still be talked about in terms of conserved energy. Like the ball at time 0 has a lot of potential energy, but no actual energy, right? Because it's not moving. Mm-hmm. And at time 1, it's moving, so it has less potential energy because it's already on its way, but it has that the energy is in its motion. Mm-hmm. But calling this phase space volume is still not quite clicking for me there yet.
Okay.
But I don't know if it needs to, because I don't actually know if that's the point of this post.
I don't know either. I do know that the phase space concept is pretty darn important, both in this particular example and in other things that are talked about. The idea, I think it was in cluster space that we were thinking of, where each attribute could be seen as one dimension, like the yellowness of a bird. And something that is really high in yellowness might be sticking way out of the main cluster if the birds typically are more like greenish than yellowish. And you can think of it like as a volume where the things by the typical are closer to the center of the object. Do you remember that kind of thing?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
That stuff lands for me. But what is that relates to things in concept space? What is, so I guess you're still trying to convey to me what phase space is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And phase space would be like, you're thinking about not the concept like yellowness, but a concept like height above the ground or velocity relative to the ground as part of the phase space. And I mean, those are my...
Okay, yeah, that's clicking. Great.
Yeah. And so then as those change, they always change in a way that conserves the volume, the total volume. There's a couple things in here where he shows what would violate this conservation of momentum, which I didn't pull out because it has to do with states changing and having various graphs that don't work well over an audio medium. I guess I'm going to have to go past that because I do not know how to explain it to you. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at there because the phase space is pretty important, but I'm not sure why exactly. And this is part of the confusion I talk about later. I'm going to skip ahead now to temperature, how that has to deal with uncertainty. If the only thing you know about a glass of water is its temperature, then you are more uncertain about a hot glass of water than a cold glass of water. Real quick, do you have a guess as to why?
Hot water has more stuff going on in it than cold water?
Yeah, exactly. Not all the molecules in hot water are traveling at the same speed. In fact, in any glass of water, not all the molecules are traveling at the same speed. That is the reason we get evaporation, which is really cool.
Right. If they're all traveling at the same speed, they'd either all evaporate or or none of them would.
Yes.
With like temperature, what you're getting there is an average.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since the hotter the water is, the faster the water molecules could be going. So there's a greater spread that any individual molecule could be in, and hence you have more uncertainty about the velocity of any individual molecule, and thus more uncertainty about the total sum of all molecules overall.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think this is intuitive if you just imagine a glass of water at 0 Kelvin,
Yeah.
right? You know what all the molecules are doing? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if it's 300 Kelvin, you're like, okay, well, there's stuff going on in here with some of these, but do I know, what does it tell me about the molecule next to it? Not much.
And he also makes the assertion that if you know the states of all the molecules in a glass of hot water, you can extract useful work by using your knowledge to take electricity out of it and leave behind an ice cube. The fact that we don't know every single thing about every molecule of water in there is fundamental and important, because once we know those things, we can use that knowledge to do work with it.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, uh, it. I think I'm following you.
Okay.
I'm curious where this is going.
That's the problem. There's a lot of physics that we went in over just now, and each individual thing I think I can wrap my head around, and I kind of see how some of them are related to others, especially when I read the post and they're kind of laid out with more segues than I put in. But like I don't see how they're related to what is going to be coming after this break right here. Like, this is literally where I put the break in my notes. Like, all the physics above makes sense, I guess. All the epistemics below, believe them, sound good. Don't see how anything relates to each other, and I think they were supposed to relate to each other somehow, and that makes me worry.
Well, it could be, not every post is as clear as others. He talks about Maxwell's demon, which I've heard of, which is like
Mm-hmm.
the idea of basically getting energy out of a system where you just put hot gas into 2 volumes and then only let fast moving molecules go from one to the other, and then only slow ones from the other one to the other one.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, how do you decide which one's going fast? And so that agent is called Maxwell's demon. I'm sure there's a Wikipedia page for it. So then Yudkowsky says, the reason that you can't build an efficient refrigerator this way is that Maxwell's demon generates entropy in the process of inspecting the gas molecules and deciding which ones to let through. But suppose you already knew where all the gas molecules were, then you could run a Maxwell's demon and extract useful work. So, like, okay, sure, if you knew the perfect state, I'll take your word for it, but what does that have to do with anything?
Yeah.
So then he goes on to talk about bits and entropy and knowledge not being subjective.
Well, that statement that Maxwell's demon is doing important thermodynamic work when it evaluates which gases, which molecules are faster than others, I think is an important part to all this. It's kind of like the linkage between the link between the top and the bottom, but I'm not sure exactly, because like the next thing I pulled out that was particularly interesting to me was that knowledge has to be represented in a brain. It is not like some mystical spirit thing that's floating somewhere out there. Knowledge doesn't exist aside from being inside a brain, and that makes it as physical as anything else. For M to physically represent an accurate picture of Y, M's physical state must correlate with Y.
Yeah, especially if it has to be an accurate picture.
Yeah.
And correlate with, not be one-to-one with necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think I see where he's going then, maybe with the Maxwell's demon thing, because like then I guess the Maxwell's demon here is what, Bayesian inference, creating knowledge from the environment.
He doesn't go that far, at least not yet. The main thing that I pulled out in relation to that is that he says one subsystem cannot increase in mutual information with another subsystem without A, interacting with it, and B, doing thermodynamic work. Which is to say, to form accurate beliefs about something, you really do have to observe it.
Interesting. I guess the "you" isn't italicized there, but really do is, because I don't have to have an accurate belief about something, right?
Why don't you?
I haven't observed how far away the sun is, but I'll take the astronomer's word for it, right?
That's a good point.
So like, I have an accurate, true belief, but it's not like my personal knowledge, like in the way that I know what color my water bottle is, but you don't.
Well, if nothing else, you observed what the astronomer said, either through reading text or through hearing them say it, right?
You're right. So in a strict way, I don't know how far away the sun is. I know how far away Neil deGrasse Tyson says it is.
Right. And
Yeah.
you had to observe Neil deGrasse Tyson or somebody to have that belief.
Right. Really, all you have to do, I guess, is put on your Mad Eye Moody thinking cap, and then this becomes more intuitive here. Okay.
And importantly, any such observation requires thermodynamic work, because it requires thermodynamic work for your neurons to do anything at all, to change from one state to another, to alter themselves.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. But I'm not doing any of the I'm not doing any of the thermodynamic work.
Well, your body is in the process of forming a belief. It must expend energy and create heat in order to change your brain in some way.
Sure, yeah, like
Okay.
the same way that like my liver whatever does something to my blood, but I'm not doing anything to my blood, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's
I
just
think that's
it's
his point.
happening to me
Yeah.
or in
Yeah.
me.
I think that's what links it back to Maxwell's demon. That Maxwell's demon would use energy of some kind because that's if you're not doing magic, then that's
Right, you need to be using energy.
required.
Yeah, okay,
Yes,
I'm with you.
Okay. So forming accurate beliefs requires a corresponding amount of evidence is a very cogent truth both in human relations and in thermodynamics. This is a great line here. If blind faith actually worked as a method of investigation, you could turn warm water into electricity and ice cubes. Just build a Maxwell's demon that has blind faith in molecule velocities.
This does tell me that I have read this post, but it would have been, in the early 2010s because that line rings a bell. But it says something that I don't remember any of the rest of this.
Right. And that ties back to the earlier thing that said, if you do know where all the molecules are, then you can take electricity out and leave behind an ice cube. So if blind faith gives you any real knowledge, then you could use blind faith to do that.
Okay, so what he's saying, the whole point of this post seems to be that forming true beliefs takes actual work.
Yes, in the thermodynamic sense.
Well, and it's kind of uselessly reductive to say it takes thermodynamic work. In my opinion, like I think what he's saying is that like you have to actually do work to get knowledge. It's not enough to just say, well, no, I just know. Because if you could just know, then you could, you would be magic, like because you'd be violating the laws of physics.
But I think this actually is an important thing to say because a lot of people do think of knowledge and ideas as non-physical things, just intuitively. I feel that way too. So it's good to be reminded that they're not. And specifically, that's why a concept like Maxwell's demon feels attractive, because you're like, why couldn't something just have this knowledge and find these things out? And it's like, because it always takes actual thermodynamic work, and therefore it would not be a perpetual motion machine that turns warm water into ice and electricity. It would be creating waste heat in the process of finding out this information, unless you believe in magic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably technically true. I guess I'm just thinking about it at a, to me, more useful level of abstraction, which is like, again, my lungs have to be delivering, through whatever mechanisms involved, oxygen to my red blood cells. It gives it to the rest of my body, gives it to my brain. But like, all that really means is that I can't hold my breath forever. And that's the part that I care about, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, what I'm taking from this is maybe not everything he wants me to take, but I'm hoping that it's at least part of it, which is like, there needs to be real work involved in getting knowledge. And if you could get it from nowhere, you'd be magic. And not, so it's not just an argument against like faith. And it might be also that the harder something is to know, the more work it takes. I mean, that's not necessarily actually true, I think, in the thermodynamic sense of the brain, though.
No, because anyone could say something and you could update on it with very little work, even if it took them tons of work to find out the really hard thing in the first place.
Yeah, but maybe to find the hard thing in the first place is the hard work that took lots of like literal energy.
Maybe. The thing that really worries me about this is that I right now feel like I am getting up my own ass about this. That I'm speaking almost some sort of mystic woo, that it feels truthy and it has a lot of sciencey words in it, but I don't fully understand them. And all that very much worries me and makes me worry about hidden divide by zero errors. And I don't want to fall into the trap of, I don't know, becoming another mystical woo-ish hippie person, believing that quantum whatever means that crystals work.
Yeah, that's kind of why I'm tossing out all the stuff I don't understand and just running with the easier version.
Yeah.
So, it's, running with the divide by zero trap there. It's like, I'm literally just making the math easier and looking at easier problems so that I can make sure I'm not doing that. So like what I can confidently say is the stuff I've said. I can't confidently restate his actual argument here because I don't understand it.
Well, I think that if we're doing some sort of analysis, critical analysis, attempting to understand the sequences, it may be kind of important to point that out, that this one, it seems to just not work, at least for me. And I go ahead.
I was just going to agree. Like there are some sequence posts that I think are more welcoming than others. And again, wanting the community to be welcoming, I want this stuff to be accessible. This is one, like if I was trying to get my friend, hey, check out how cool rationality is, I would not send them this one,
Yeah.
right? Even if
I
maybe if they were a physicist who, really loved, everything Maxwell ever did or something, and they were like super into all this stuff,
hmm Then
but
totally.
even then it's still like, if they ask me like, oh, can you tell me more about that? Like, no, sorry, I can't because
Now,
I don't understand it well enough.
is that is that a problem for the community though? Because that feels like a Trinity thing. Like, oh, you can't understand the Trinity just yet. Maybe once you get more knowledgeable in the ways of the spirit, or more knowledgeable in the ways of physics and calculus. Like,
Eh,
on the one hand, I understand like writing to the people who need to hear from you, and he's writing to his fellow super mathy calc nerds. But on the other hand, if we're trying to make this a wider thing,
I mean, some stuff is just going to be more complicated. It's like, uh,
yeah,
whatever. The world's greatest physicists getting together and talking about stuff are going to be able to have conversations that even other physicists can't follow. Um, it it's, I guess, I don't think it's a problem for like the movement though or anything, like, because for whatever it's worth, I've been quote unquote somewhat level of involved in this stuff for like 15 years, and I still don't
yeah,
quite get this right.
yeah.
Um, so I don't think this is necessary, like requisite knowledge to be in the know.
Maybe we need sort of like a Saint Paul to come around, and a Scott Alexander perhaps to make this stuff more explicable to the people who don't have advanced calculus knowledge.
Or, realistically too, one of our listeners better understands this stuff and can give us a better analogy that explains what he's trying to get across here. Because
I'm
Dukowski
worried.
is a really good writer, but he's not perfect. And I
Yeah,
think this is an example of because we're not, you and I aren't super geniuses, but neither are we stupid, and we don't understand what this is exactly trying to say. Uh, like at again, because I'm reading last sentences, I understand where it's getting, but
mhm.
I don't quite understand all this work to get there, other than maybe just kind of like an indulgent way of making the point here at the end. Um,
Yeah.
and then if someone says, well, sure, but it's like, well, no, actually, because I've just proven with all this other stuff.
That's the part that gets me. Well, I've just proven with all this other stuff, and then the other person is left saying like, well, I can't understand all that other stuff, so I don't know. Am I stuck taking it on faith?
Yeah, that's a valid concern and an interesting worry. I mean, I would make this point differently, without talking about thermodynamics and Maxwell's demon. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that the point of this can actually be distilled down to a handful of the quotes, right?
Yeah.
The bold one about, to form accurate beliefs about something, you really do have to observe it. That
Mhm.
knowledge can't come from nowhere,
Mhm.
um, and that
Information is stored in brains.
yeah, that knowledge is stored in brains. I mean, it's interesting because like you have knowledge that you don't know you have stored in your brain,
hmm
and I don't quite know how that works in this model. I mean, like, for example, even though you haven't known until I told you that you can't buy plutonium at Starbucks, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
But I guess the work of that comes from knowing about plutonium and about what Starbucks is.
hmm
So it's kind of just like an inference there, and maybe that inference takes a bit of work. I guess I just don't see this usefully abstracted all the way down to the level of molecules. I see this being useful at the level of facts and truth and knowledge, right?
Yeah. Agreed. Maybe someone can tell us why the invoking of molecules was important.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. So, what is the final thing at the end here that you tried to get to a few times, which I find ironically appropriate?
No, you're good. He says in quotes, "Cold rationality," unquote, is true in a sense that Hollywood scriptwriters never dreamed, and false in the sense that they did dream. Um, so unless you can tell me which specific step of your argument violates the laws of physics by giving you true knowledge of the unseen, don't expect me to believe that a big, elaborate, clever argument can do it either. Maybe
I,
this is actually a satire slash self-aware nudge nudge wink wink thing.
oh, maybe it's a test.
He's making this simple point at the end,
Yeah.
uh, but then he gives this whole long, complicated argument about the laws of physics and thermodynamics and stuff,
Yeah.
in a big, clever, elaborate argument.
Yeah.
So maybe we're not supposed to believe that. We're, if we can't, uh, whatever, notice the specific bits that are true. But I think he's talking about something different, and I'm reading into that
No,
incorrectly.
No, man. I love this reading that, 100 years from now, or 1,000 years from now, when the monks are analyzing the scrolls, they will say, like, and here he proved by, clever joke that, you shouldn't believe big, elaborate, clever arguments by giving a big, elaborate, clever argument, which didn't seem to say much of anything and may have violated the laws of physics in it. But you don't know which part violated the laws of physics, so you're stuck accepting it or not.
Yeah, I can dig it. Maybe that's what he's doing, but I'm not sure.
Right.
He probably has many purposes
is.
here.
Yeah. And of course he would never cop to it if he was.
Yeah.
Because that would ruin it.
So I think what he's getting at there too with the quote unquote cold rationality is like cold fusion. It's like knowledge from nowhere. And he's like, that's not actually possible. And it's not possible for like actual physical reasons, but also just like intuitive and easier to explain, higher level physical reasons,
Yeah.
But
I'm glad we struggled through this and got to the end.
Me too.
And made this, yeah.
I don't think we would have done any better if I had stopped to read it. So
good point. This was probably the best course.
Teaching. All right, well, this ties neatly, I'm assuming, into the next one called perpetual motion beliefs.
I hope it does.
And so he opens talking about, a quote from the last one, that to form accurate beliefs, you really do have to observe it.
He talks a lot about probability of beliefs. And brings up a lottery ticket saying, someone has a lottery ticket says you can't prove I won't win, which means you may have calculated a low probability of winning, but since it is a probability, it's just a suggestion, and I am allowed to believe what I want. And Eliezer says, yeah, sure. Smash an egg on the floor. The rule that says that the egg won't spontaneously reform and leap back into your hand is merely probabilistic. It's like that glass of water that, could spontaneously form ice cubes and electricity. A suggestion, if you will. So why not just ignore that suggestion? Then the egg will unscramble itself, right?
I like that analogy a lot because, the egg reassembling and flying into the person's hand isn't strictly impossible with the laws of physics.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so unlikely that it'll literally never happen unless you're, got a Tegmark sized view of the universe, right?
Right.
In which case it's happening somewhere at some point, but probably just once. So, it's like, there's I think this is succinctly, maybe not put in this post, but probably in Methods of Rationality and elsewhere, that one must be mindful to distinguish possibility from probability. Right? There is a possibility that when you buy a lottery ticket, you'll win. Right?
Yes.
In fact, there's a very calculable possibility. It approaches zero, but it's non-zero. Now, will you probably win? Now, hell no.
Yeah, I like the way that he put it. It's probability constrains what you expect. He says you cannot expect the egg to reform. You must expect it to smash. Your mandatory belief is that the egg's probability of spontaneous reformations is approximately zero. So even though there is, a possibility, it's not literally zero that the egg will reform, it is mandatory to expect that it won't reform due to that's how probabilities work and how expectations work.
Yeah. There's a line in here that I like too, that probabilities are not logical truths, but the laws of probability are.
Yeah.
What if I guess the state of the boiling water and I happen to guess correctly? Well, then, congratulations. It's like winning the lottery. Your chance of guessing correctly by luck. That was my answer, was the lottery. His answer is better. Your chance of guessing correctly by luck is even less than the chance of the water cooling down in your hand by luck.
Yes.
But you can't prove I won't guess correctly. I can, and indeed must, assign extremely low probability to it. That's not the same thing as certainty, though. Hey, maybe if you add enough wheels and gears to your argument, it'll turn warm water into electricity and ice cubes. I love it.
No. He does point out that, like, when half-trained or 10th-trained rationalists, or I'm going to insert here, people who call themselves post-rationalists but have never touched rationality, when they abandon their art and try to believe without evidence just this once, they often build vast edifices of justification, confusing themselves just enough to conceal the magical steps. There's always some step where a tiny probability turns into a large one, where they try to believe without evidence, where they step into the unknown thinking, no one can prove me wrong. Their foot naturally lands on thin air, for there is far more thin air than ground in the realms of possibility. Which is, again, why you must expect thin air. It's just so much more of it than ground.
I love it. I think some part of that must have been in Methods of Rationality, or just somehow managed to stick in my brain. Right. The part where a step where the tiny probability turns into a large one. That seems to be a failure mode of really anytime anyone who's otherwise smart goes wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've talked with a couple people who won't exactly say outright that they believe in magic, but act like they do, and then sometimes say they do.
Yeah.
At some point, there's like what I would consider a tiny possibility of like, well, there's this other stuff that's not physics that's affecting the outcomes of things or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's tiny, but to them, it ceases to be tiny. It gets big.
Yeah.
Right? Big enough for them to spend money and change their life around, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, you can't have you got to be mindful of what your probabilities actually are.
Yeah.
Cool. I can dig it.
All right. Well, what are we reading next time then?
I think next time we are doing, there it is, Searching for Bayes' Structure and Conditional Independence and Naive Bayes.
Excellent. And you got a leg up because you've already read those.
Yeah, but I'll reread them by, next recording, so it'll go faster the next time. But before we wrap up, we got a couple things.
We do.
Got to give a shout out to the Guild of the Rose mentioned earlier. They are they're an affiliate of ours who support the show, and we support them in exchange. They are the Rationalist Dojo of the real world.
Yes.
If you like any of this stuff and want to get better at it, but don't quite know how, this is where. You can only get so far practicing martial arts forms by yourself in your basement, right?
Yeah, you can get somewhere.
You can get somewhere, but you can't get as far as you can working in a group with a professional teaching you and a group of people learning with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the Guild of the Rose. Do check them out, and if that doesn't already sound fun, they make everything really fun. They've got it's like a video game for life. Again, the path system is like a skill tree in video games. It's excellent.
Yes, I don't know what else to add to that. You covered it very well this week.
Yay! Well, I got to give another special shout out this week or this episode to William Barrow. He is our supporting patron who brought this episode to you. We hope that the mad ramblings of two out of practice podcasters was an episode that you didn't mind your name being attached to. But thanks a lot, William. We appreciate it.
William, thank you. It's nice to have a self-indulgent episode every now and then. It felt good doing this, and thank you for supporting us in all our episodes. Obviously, you are not supporting just this one, and we really do appreciate it. It makes life feel more meaningful.
It does. And if that's within your bounds and ability, we'd love it. But if not, totally fine. You can also, talk about the show, share it with people, rate it on iTunes. What else do people do with stuff? Just have fun. Join the Discord. Talk with us. Talk with the community at large. We've got hundreds of people on there, and they're all really cool. So
yeah, except for that one guy. We all hate that one guy.
Steven, yeah.
Steven Carlsberg.
Is that somebody?
That's an old reference to Welcome to Night Vale. He, for the first several seasons, really hated Steve Carlsberg.
Oh, that rings a bell. I didn't get past the first several seasons, but I got several seasons in. Then I sort of just I got the gist, and I was like, okay, this is just more of this.
Yeah, I think I stopped after season 3 or 4. Yeah, I agree. As with most stuff, eventually you just run out. Well, I know when Joseph Fink left is basically when I stopped listening. It started going a little downhill before that, but
wait, didn't we go to a live show together in Denver?
We did. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that would have been
great.
That would have been 10 years ago, right? Just about.
Dude, I don't even
8?
know. A while.
Ages.
I know that Cecil did eventually reconcile with Steve Carlsberg, and that's also around the time it started to go downhill, in my opinion. So, yeah. Steve Carlsberg ruined Welcome to Night Vale.
Alas.
Well,
I can't think of a more fun note to end this one on, so
okay.
Let's call it, and we'll be back in a couple weeks.
Awesome. Thank you, Steven. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.